A very good morning and welcome to the 9th meeting of the Criminal Justice Committee in 2026. We have no apologies this morning and our first item of business is to agree whether to take items 7 and 8 in private. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Our next item of business is evidence on reflections on the budget proposed for 2026 to 27 and the Scottish Spending Review. So this morning we're focusing on Police Scotland and I refer members to papers 1 and 2. And I welcome to the meeting Chief Constable Joe Farrell, Deputy Chief Constable Alan Spears, Professionalism and Enabling Services, and Sarah Roughhead, Chief Financial Officer at Police Scotland. So a warm welcome to you all. So we've got around 60 minutes for this session, but again, if I can remind everyone to ask succinct questions and provide succinct responses. So can we start off by inviting the Cabinet Secretary, Chief Constable, to make a short opening statement. Chief Constable.
Morning. Thank you, Convener. Morning, Committee. Thank you for the invitation to provide reflections on the budget and the spending review. Throughout our evidence to inform the Committee's pre-budget scrutiny, we've been clear about the pressures on policing, and I also recognise the acute pressures on public finances. There is recognition, consensus in Parliament and in the Government's reform strategy of the reform achieved by policing, which has included significant workforce reductions. I'm grateful for the Committee's explicit call for achievements to be reinvested. The budget was outlined in January, and notwithstanding that the allocation was less than requested, I have made difficult decisions which prioritise frontline services for our communities, to ensure that we can maintain officer numbers at 16,500 in the coming year. As I said, I recognise the difficult choices faced across the public sector. I believe Scottish Government support is welcome recognition of the reform already achieved by Police Scotland. Our recent Best Value audit highlighted our clear vision: safer communities, less crime, supported victims and a thriving workforce, as well as policing's hard-won track record of strong financial management and a commitment to collaboration. Policing has demonstrated value to communities and to the public purse. The spending review, however, highlights the scale of the challenge for public finances moving forward. Pressures on policing and others are driven by unmet mental health need, a strained criminal justice system, growing online harms, poverty, civil unrest, geopolitics and heightened assessment of counter-state and terrorist threats, as well as increasing demand to service public inquiries. I would underline my commitment to continue to maximise capacity from the resources available through strategic planning and supporting more people back to work. We'll continue to drive improvements and efficiencies to cut out bureaucracy and automate and rationalise processes in the middle and back office functions to focus every possible resource on our front line. I am leading a cultural shift that is prepared to carry a greater risk appetite and draws clearer lines with ourselves and with our partners about where policing starts and where policing must finish. I will work with Scottish Government and across the public sector to ensure policing continues to be a good partner and that we are in good partnerships. The potential for further savings must continue to be set against the threat, risk and harm I have outlined. The service our communities need, deserve and expect, and with an understanding of the pressure on officers and staff. My focus will be on keeping people safe, giving victims of crime a professional, trauma-informed service and the relentless supporting of our frontline. We can all support a whole-system prevention approach which delivers better outcomes and value, and which reduces the need placed on policing and the criminal justice system. Police Scotland will continue to play our part in striving to those ambitions, while doing our level best to respond to the existing need, demand and risk in our communities, online and across borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief Constable. So we'll move straight into questions, and I wonder if I can just pick up on a point that you made in your opening remarks about the challenges relating to unmet mental health need, and you'll be aware of the evidence that we took from your colleagues ACC Katrina Payton and Nikki Page on the 18th of February on the impact on policing of responding to well-being and vulnerable people in the community. And one of the issues flagged in that session was the specific duty in section 32 of the 2012 Police and Fire Reform Act, which stated that one of the main policing principles is, and I quote, to improve the safety and well-being of persons, localities and communities in Scotland. And at a recent SPA board, you provided figures to say that Police Scotland was now being called out to around 700 mental health incidents every day. So you're reported as saying that the police cannot continue to operate in this way. And I note your comments in the recent 1919 magazine that around 88% of police call-outs now involve no criminality, with police time increasingly taken up by public safety concerns, wellbeing checks and mental health crises. And it's an issue that the committee is well familiar with, having held a number of evidence sessions around this issue. So can I maybe ask the Chief Constable if you have a view on the level of police resources being utilised to respond to this wellbeing challenge on the police?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. I'll kick off, and then I'll ask DCC Spears to talk to some of the very, very specific detail. In my opening address, I talked strongly in relation to my commitment, our commitment to partnership working and working in collaboration for the greater good of the people we serve, but also to ensure value for money from the public purse. And you know that I've been very vocal previously in relation to the criminal justice system. And I'll draw that as a comparison because I think in the time I've been here as the Chief Constable, we have made, with partners, some significant improvements across the justice system through leadership across the different agencies within that system. So summary case management, which is judicial-led, use of body-worn video and desk, and I could go on and on. And while there is more work to be done, and you may be familiar with the joint inspection report around citations that was published yesterday, which clearly highlights there is more work to be done. We can see improvements, we can see reducing costs to policing, and we can see a better service to victims. In contrast to the point of your question, we have entered into strong collaborations around trying to get a better solution for those people who find themselves in mental health crisis and distress. And nothing I say here in relation to mental health detracts from the individual harm being caused to individuals. But as my colleague ACC Payton said, it's mental health, not justice. And within the context of this coming year's budget and the spending review, and my patience since the autumn of 2023 in this space, I've really reached the conclusion that we are going to have to do something quite significant in relation to our response, because our priority cannot be caring for those who find themselves in vulnerable positions. It needs to be in relation to preventing and detecting crime and bringing criminals to justice.
So can I just, on that very point, Chief Constable, can I ask if there would perhaps be any value in revisiting the sort of current interpretation of well-being, or the well-being duty that's set out in the 2012 Act, and if you believe that would potentially lead to a freeing up of frontline policing resources? And I know it's a very hard act to balance in terms of our response to those that are most vulnerable, but the reality of the pressures that brings to the force.
Yeah. So, very cognisant of the legislation. I think, unless somebody tells me different, that piece, that word within the legislation has never been tested legally. My interpretation of it, that our policing response acknowledges that we have a role in the well-being of the broader society and the people of Scotland. But what it's not, unless somebody wants to bring some legal challenge in that space, is that we are responsible for every individual's overall health and well-being. So our Article 2, right to life responsibilities are absolutely something that sits at the focus. But in terms of that broader care around vulnerability, where there's no other issues directly relating to us, has to sit somewhere else. But I would, if you don't mind, Convener, just allow DCC Spears just to give the committee a broader flavour of what we've done and where we find ourselves, and some of the data in relation to this.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I think we recognise there will always be a small number of instances where the police attendance and support will be critical. There will be some people in extreme crisis. We've introduced, as you know, and you'll have heard much about the mental health pathway and our ability to divert calls away from the service, and the introduction of a mental health index, which allows officers to have access to clinicians when they're dealing with incidents. What I would say is the impact of those initiatives has little bearing on the day-to-day volume of calls. So we've talked about 475 calls and incidents per day. On average, 2 officers are tied up to that type of incident about 6 hours. So the drain on that resource is huge. And going forward, we need to look at ways in which we can free people up a lot quicker. We try to transfer a range of calls into different parts of the National Health Service. Right now, it's a warm transfer, so we're stuck with those incidents and calls until we get a service on the other end of the phone. So we need to look at a more efficient way of doing that. We take 27 to 30% of all those calls are from another service, passing on to the police service. We need to engage with the partners around that, and in an inordinate amount of time we spend at hospital, and that's what is consuming the 4 to 6 hours. But you'll again have heard 85% of those calls is not about a crime. So we are looking at what can we do that would have a much more significant impact. The pathway, the index, is working well, but it's a fraction of calls. So over 2 years, we've transferred 15,000 incidents. That's 20 a day, set against 475. So for the frontline officer, it's negligible in terms of their experience.
Thanks very much. I think I've got a couple of members. Are you looking to come in on this? So I'll bring in Jamie Hepburn, then Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Convener. This area, understandably, the focus tends to be on capacity within the health service to try and accommodate those that are maybe brought into the hospital environment. I think we understand that, obviously, is a significant issue, and may indeed be the primary issue. But I was taken with some of the evidence we gathered at the session on the 18th of February. We heard from Dr Steele, Robbie Steele, who's consultant psychiatrist, works with NHS Scotland. I know he's involved in interacting with Police Scotland to try and improve things. But I was quite taken with the point he made that presumably police officers are bringing a person to the hospital environment and think, well, this is the right place for the person to be, this is a safe place for the person to be. And sometimes his experience would be saying to officers, right, you've brought the person here, you can go now. But they say they can't, and quite often it's at the instruction of a superior officer that they're not able to go. And press that point with David Thurgold as well, and he said that can be the experience too. So ACC Payton did say there was some work to try and build up confidence across officers to be able to say, recognise, we can leave now. But do you recognise that as a challenge? Because even if it's marginal in terms of the challenge, presumably there's, we're talking about the budget today, there would be a a cost benefit to being able to say the officers can go now because they've taken someone to the hospital?
I do recognise it. I think speaking to officers, that desire to stay with the person, I think, is driven by two things. I think there's a genuine empathy with the person who's in crisis and wanting to do the right thing and then there is, in varying degrees, and David Threadgold will have spoken to this, a fear of the consequences of if that person leaves and some harm comes to them, then, as you know, as this committee knows, we are bound for those incidents to be investigated by the PERC. And that's quite a strong cultural grip on the organisation in terms of that. So, you know, on an individual officer level, I understand that. But I think you heard David maybe saying, and he and I have spoken about this in the last week or so, I need to give frontline sergeants and inspectors the confidence, the tools to raise our risk appetite, use the tools available to us. We have a decision-making model that we use in all sorts of scenarios and say, based on this criteria and as we head towards the rollout of body-worn video, the complete rollout of body-worn video in May, that is a really powerful tool, I think, in terms of giving officers some support, some confidence that maybe I take a short video of you and I say, Mr Hepburn, I'm going to leave you here. We're in A&E. You're going to be seen in due course. It's probably going to be a wait. And using that as one of the levers that we now have got to give our sergeants and our inspectors the right support to say, we're going to leave you. You're in a place of safety. It's an A&E department. You're not here under arrest, and we need to then move on to other duties.
Presume I would have
to move on. If I can bring in Sharon
okay.
and maybe come back to this point, or your question, Jamie, if we've got time, but we have limited time, and if I can ask for questions and responses to be succinct, and then I'll bring in Rona Mackay with another supplementary.
Okay, I'll try to be quick then. DC Spears, you had said earlier on you were looking at ways of freeing people up earlier. But I think in a lot of instances, probably the police should never have got the call in the first place. And I don't know whether you managed to see the evidence that we took a couple of weeks ago from the NHS, and they spoke about frameworks for collaboration and community triage guides, etc. But I wonder if you'd managed to listen to that, if you've got any comments on what the NHS are actually doing to try and prevent the calls going to the police in the first place, and whether you think they're actually moving at enough pace or putting in enough help so that you don't get the calls?
I think in the first instance, it's felt over the last couple of years that we've been in the driving force to try and make inroads into the handling of mental health calls. So I think there's a lot more that partners could do and could definitely do with a greater degree of urgency. I mean, I think we also have to recognise that the public's kind of go to quite often is treble 9 and 101, and they recognise that on those calls they're getting a really quick service. So on one hand, there will always be a range of calls that we'll end up at, and we'll arrive at hospitals and we'll have an approach that the Chief Constable has described. But moving forward, we're looking to start to have a cold transfer where at the point of that call coming into the police, when it's not for the police, we will divert that straight to the NHS. Right now, I spoke earlier about it's a warm transfer, which means we wait for somebody to answer the phone, and ultimately, if the phone doesn't get answered, we send our officers. So we need to do more. You're absolutely right at that initial point, and I think we will do some of that. I think I said again, 20–30% of those calls are other services pushing it to the police because they don't have the service to provide at that point in time. So we need to influence that space as well. I welcome the initiatives that I'm hearing about. I just have a concern that the pace in which progress has been made over the last couple of years has been incredibly slow, and it ultimately remains with us.
And very briefly, Rona Mackay.
Very briefly, yeah, it was just good morning. It was just to, I'm wondering how your new strategy, for want of a better word, translates to small communities, like a village, rural communities. Would you still operate in the same way that if someone's in distress, you'd be the first port of call?
I think we use the Thrive assessment within our service centres, and that will never change. So we will always look at threat, risk and harm. And I think the message is we will never be there. I think there'll be lots of instances that proximity, availability, that there's a space for a police response. What we need in these instances, when we do provide that response, we need other services to come behind us an awful lot quicker. But I think it would be really important, particularly to your remote and rural communities, that we're not intent on abandoning the communities at their point of need. So we recognise the importance of that, and we will thrive, assess and work with ambulance services and other elements of the NHS service.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? So 60% of the calls coming in this space are an individual themselves requesting help from us or a family member. When you look at that data, we'd all have to look and say there are some significant shortcomings if a family member thinks that the police are the go-to to support their family member. So, you know, we could talk at length about it, but NHS, social care have to step into this space. This is not. It's not a policing requirement. So I've probably said enough on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Liam Kerr, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, convener, and good morning, Chief Constable and panel. Chief Constable, you told this committee, and your submission reiterates, that you required a minimum of £104.9 million uplift simply to cover, you've said, pay, inflation, new legislation, unavoidable pressures, national insurance hikes. You've actually been given £90.3 million, and your submission also says that there's a further cost of £5 million that's been identified. So it begs the question, what specific operational reductions will be required as a direct consequence of that £19 million shortfall? And will that mean fewer officers on the streets?
Thank you. So we have spent a considerable amount of time working through where we can take cost out of the budget in order to maintain those officer numbers. And you've heard me speak many times around frontline policing being a priority. The measures that we've taken are not without risk, and I'll talk you through some of those areas. So we've looked closely around prioritising the front line, and ensuring that we have got an ongoing commitment to drive efficiencies, remove duplication, increase capacity across the system. But some of the very specific levers we've pulled in order to ensure that frontline policing strength sits around vacancies across some of our police staff functions, with the exception of our staff in custody and our staff in the control rooms. You know that we ran some pilots in relation to workforce modernisation. So this was civilian investigators. These were people working in our professional standards department. The feedback is really positive in that space, and we have managed to maintain some of the modernised posts. So again, in our control room and in firearms licensing. But unfortunately, we weren't able to progress into this year some of the other modernised posts. We have gone through line by line by line around non-pay, as you would expect us to do, and probably the big point and the area of most risk is in relation to our overtime budget. Some of that we have a degree of control on. Some of it we have no control, so officers attending court on rest days or annual leave. And overtime is an important tool to policing. So if I just point to two big operations that you're familiar with from last year, Operation Portledge, which was the organised crime feud across the central belt, and Operation Lest, which was our response to protest across the country. So we are bearing down on the overtime spend. There is risk associated with that. And two other areas highlight in terms of risk. Last week, there was a further public inquiry announced. Currently we have limited budget for that. And also limited budget around new legislation. Discussions are ongoing with the government in relation to those areas, together with inflation guarantee. So there are significant risks, but my priority is the front line.
Thank you. The related question then is that the SPA budget for 26-27 includes 86.3 million of capital funding. But again, you requested £93.9 million. You said in your opening remarks you've made difficult decisions already. So that then begs the question, what capital works have been put off? What will suffer as a result of this significant shortfall? And where is that going to have the greatest impact, for example, on your planned IT improvements?
DCC Spears will pick up that bit, and then I think Sarah will also want to come in. Thank you.
Yeah, so you've started to focus on what part of the answer is. So a big proportion of our capital spend is around data and digital and systems. And what we've been working on over the last few weeks is a series of challenge panels just to work out as to what is affordable. And in effect, some of that work will have to slow down, and the pace in which we're looking to bring in improved systems. So we were looking at an ecosystem for where finance and people come together that connects to a resourcing model. We have old systems that are probably out with support just now, but we'll have to take the progress of them at a much slower pace. So I think our ambition remains that we'd want to deliver on our data and digital programme, but not at the pace and with a level of ambition. One of the debates that we'll probably have in the coming weeks is, what does phase 2 of our rollout of body-worn video look like, and is that something we would look to continue to do at this point in time? The other big element is around our estate, and we've been very vocal about the need for significant improvement on our estate, and this will require us just to have a closer look at managing our ambition as we get into the next year around how we progress on our estate. And we recognise that there's some critical work that would probably be in the health and safety space that we will have to do, but we are recalibrating whether or not we can deliver on every aspect of the estate work that we'd hope to do.
And thank you. Just to add to that question, in terms of our capital spend, that the majority of that spend is across estates, fleet and digital transformation that DCC Spears mentioned. We have an estates 5-year master plan, which is helpful in terms of, together with a prioritisation matrix, which helps us on that multi-year planning, but also helps us with that prioritisation where in-year budgets, annual budgets don't allow us to perhaps complete everything that we needed to. To DCC Spears' point on that multi-year planning, we don't want to lose sight of between ambition, what we could do over estates and transformation, but also what we need to do from a restoring the estate, which is health and safety items, not luxury upgrades, but what is really critical maintenance. And then what is available within the funding envelope. And that's the balance that we need to manage. And I think broader, we've raised this with Mr McKee and at this committee, I'm sure in the past as well, is those areas that would be helpful to us around multi-year planning outside of the annual budgeting is borrowing. We lost the ability to borrow when we became the national force. So that is a really important factor that will help on our capital budgets going forward if we have the ability to borrow. but also reserves rollover and thinking about other income streams that we can bring into the organisation.
Very grateful.
Okay,
Convener.
thank you very much. Pauline McNeill, then Fulton McGregor.
Good morning. I wanted to ask the Chief Constable about the community policing stuff, but could I just ask Sarah if she could maybe clarify something about the budget? Hopefully it's an easy one. So the Justice and Home Affairs portfolio is receiving £30.4 million of additional funding in the spring budget review. The largest component relates to £24.7 million, and that's for the United States presidential, vice presidential visits. Is that part of the £90 million, or is that in addition? I just wanted to check that.
So that was for the President and Vice President visits in the current year, 25-26.
Right.
And that was funding that we received. So we recorded that separate to our main budget allocation in the current year. And we received that funding through the spring budget review, the spring budget review in the current year. So it's all this year, nothing relating to next year. So the 90.3 is for our budget for 26-27.
Doesn't include that figure.
Doesn't include that figure.
That's a relief. Thank you.
But for other major events such as Commonwealth Games, again, we're expecting no detriment to policing, and so that 90.3 does not cover, in our view, anything for the Commonwealth Games. As an example, we'll look to be speaking to government, and we're already discussing in government about what the implications of that are.
Thank you, that's helpful. Chief Constable, I wanted to ask you about the 600 community police officers that you'd asked for, which the committee fully supported. This idea, I think that's what I think communities want, is to see more visibility police officers. Are you able to see how much of this you are able, in numbers, what you're able to do with the budget that you've got available, short of the 600? Is that possible?
Thank you. So we will continue to roll out a community policing model that has sort of 4 key elements to it, and I could talk at length about this. You know, and you're aware of some of these areas. So you have response, dedicated neighbourhood policing, community policing officers, an investigation hub to take those crimes and investigate those that affect local people. And in addition, and over time, we'll seek to centralise some of our safeguarding functions to make them more efficient. So in the bid, we talked about an additional 600 officers into community policing. That would have been the ideal from my perspective, to your point, in relation to that strong, visible presence. But I'm a realist, and we know, as I said in the opening, the position around public finances. So that won't stop us progressing with that model. One of the key elements, and where we've received really positive feedback, is ensuring that we're really, really efficient in terms of attending to people, responding to people, non-emergency calls, and ensuring that we've got resource that supports what we call our diary system. So if we're going to be here at 2 o'clock tomorrow, we'll be there at 2 o'clock tomorrow. So we're building that, and we move into a couple more of the divisions during this month. During last month, and we'll continue, and we'll have some academic evaluation of it as we move forward and develop it. Would the 600 extra have been good, nice? And absolutely it would, but I'm a realist, and we'll continue to move forward and make those policing teams at a local level as visible and as effective as they can be. And I talked in the opening around some of our, what we say, middle and back office functions. While they're important, some of them currently are done at a divisional level, and they can be done at a national level. And I'll give you an example. So we have 13 crime management units, and it's only been at the point as we've moved to a national crime system that we're now able to move from the local crime management units to a national provision using the technology as the foundation, and that will drive efficiencies, and all of that efficiency will be pushed into the front line.
Thank you. So you'll have less than 600 under this budget arrangement. Yeah. Just lastly, I guess communities want to have that connection with the local police officer. I mean, to what extent in your model do you think there might be more connection with local communities, like a named police officer, for example, or just a bit more? One of the criticisms I have of the centralisation is I feel it's such a big organisation that when you call the police to find out what's happened, if a crime has been committed, very often that officer won't be in duty for ages, and that disconnect, that's where people feel a lack of confidence. Do you think this model will be able to bring some connection back, some identity, if you like?
Yes, and one of the priorities for those investigation hubs is to firstly ensure that we progress those inquiries quickly, that victims are updated, and in addition to that, that we can see patterns of crime, and so to ensure that we respond to those quickly and nip them in the bud. But absolutely, to your point, victims expect to know who's investigating my crime, how do I contact them, and ensuring that there's regular updates in terms of the progress of the crime.
Thank you very much. Fulton McGregor, and I'll bring back Sharon Dowie if you'd like to come in again.
Well, thanks, Convener, and good morning to the panel. It does sound like you've done a really good job with the budget, making things work and making sure that the main services are functioning well, but it doesn't sound like there's a lot of room for movement. So what I wanted to ask about was about emergency situations, which can't be predicted. And the one obviously I've got in mind just now, as you'll know, is the situation that we're witnessing just now in the Middle East, which will ultimately have an impact back home, and we know that yourselves will be picking up that in the main, making sure there's community cohesion, that sort of thing. How do you factor in that within such a sort of tight budget? Do you get extra support for such situations, or do you just have to work with what you've got?
Thank you. As you've referenced there, we saw an immediate impact following events in the Middle East at the weekend. There was protest on the streets of Glasgow. We were expecting about 100 people. That was between 400 and 500 people on that lunchtime last Saturday. And in addition to supporting that, and you talked there about cohesion, our response was to ensure that we were heavily engaged with different communities across Scotland to get a sense of the impact that this was having at a local level. I anticipate that will continue. In our original bid, we had a request around an uplift in relation to serious organised crime and counter-terrorism. And I've already started those conversations with Scottish Government officials in this space, because if I wind back to what I said earlier in relation to where the risks are for us in the budget, and the overtime being one of them, one of our responses to ensure that we can fulfil those obligations is to use overtime. Officers on rest days, officers working extra hours, which has an impact, but that is the very practical use of that money, and we've at the moment scrutinised and really borne down on that. But as I say, I think that might be the basis of some ongoing discussions this financial year with Scottish Government, because clearly safety and security is our priority and your priority.
And you think that with the budget you've got, and you don't know how things might escalate or not, but you feel confident you'll be able to continue to respond to such events, or the continuation of this event and how it might impact communities here? You feel that you can continue to do that?
Well, we absolutely will respond. we've got a strong track record in relation to that. But inevitably, if there are risks as we move into the financial year, that will be subject of ongoing dialogue with officials and with politicians to ensure that we can meet the needs of communities.
And I should just say as well, before I finish, that I know you do have a good, strong track record from working my own constituency when there has been such events with local mosques and stuff like that. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Dowie and then Julia Hepburn.
Thank you. You'd mentioned in your opening statement about the cost of public inquiries, and you'd also mentioned the cost of legislation. So I was just wondering, we were having a review into grooming gangs, and I know that you were allocated money for it. That's now been changed into an inquiry. So I was wondering, is that going to be an additional cost for Police Scotland? And if it is, has the Scottish Government given you the extra money that's going to be required for it? On your budget, you didn't get the ask that you wanted that actually said that would just keep you standing still. So how can we ensure, with the lesser amount of money that you're getting, that your police officers will be able to investigate fully any concerns that have been brought to them about any instances with grooming gangs that are getting brought to them, like right now? And my last one, third question here was, like, we've got a lot of SSIs that come to us, and we've got one coming today that's basically on trafficking. Now, it does say that it's not going to be effective until February next year, but there are going to be costs along with that, even if it's just training, and because it's February, it's still going to be within this year's budget. So do you have conversations with the Scottish Government in advance of them bringing the SSIs to committee, and have they committed more money so that that can be implemented properly? Thanks.
Thank you. I'll pick up a couple of those points and we'll see if we work through and get you all the answers. So in relation to public inquiries, we've got a limited amount of money allocated to that currently, and that's part of the ongoing dialogue with Scottish Government officials. We all know the importance of public inquiries in relation to getting answers for families. So we enter into all of these with absolute candour. But I welcome, and I just draw the committee's attention, you'll be aware of this, the report that was produced around public inquiries and the cost and the effectiveness of them. And I'll quote that they're currently poorly defined. And with that goes extension of time and therefore cost. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether that serves families well in terms of them waiting great swathes of time, years in some cases, in order to get an answer. So there is something different to be done in that space. So we're committed to them. Limited budget currently. In relation specifically in relation to grooming gang, group-based CSE, again, you know, our absolute candour and engagement with that public inquiry. And you'll be aware that we are also carrying out a review of some historic cases in line with Baroness Casey's report that focused on England and Wales, but we have followed the same methodology in ensuring that if we look back at cases through the lens of both 2026 and the intelligence that policing has UK-wide, is there further work we can do to support victims in that space? Is there a part of that I've missed?
I'm just wondering about the hearing. It's probably, you've just said there about looking back in cases. So one of the biggest concerns I've got is if you don't get the budget that you need to make sure that you're going to get more community officers and more people on like boots in the ground, as they say, then how are they going to have enough time to go and investigate all the things that are actually happening right now?
Yeah, and you pull out a key point. That's some of the day-to-day challenge in terms of threat, risk and harm, and balancing vulnerability and victimisation and today that's happening now versus what's happened in the past. And where we have used some of our civilian investigators has been in that space in terms of working on some of the historic inquiries in order to move through those inquiries as quickly as we can, at the same time as today safeguarding vulnerable people, vulnerable children, vulnerable victims.
Okay. And the SSI, sorry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're really well engaged and we're well aware of what's coming forward. But in the context of legislation, public inquiries, SSIs, we don't have a budgetary provision. We are very actively engaged with government around how do we receive the financial support for all of that. But I think we've identified it as one of the big risk areas as in around affordability. And just to build on the Chief's point, we quite simply don't have a budgetary provision that will service 6 public inquiries in a year. We have no budgetary provision at this point in time for any introduction of legislation. So that's where one of our large risks will lie as we go through the year.
Huge concern then. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. First, going back to the capital budget allocation. So you got around 92% of what you were seeking, which I think was around 23% up on the ABR position, but clearly not everything you'd been seeking. So you've touched a little in terms of prioritisation, but I suppose it's just going back to the estate requirements and the digital data requirements. Now, I appreciate some of it, body-worn cameras we've mentioned, for example. That's a very specific thing that only Police Scotland could carry. But one of the things we did touch on across a range of bodies in previous budget evidence was about the potential for greater collaboration, thinking particularly probably in the area of digital, but maybe estate as well. I'm just keen to understand, is that something that is being actively looked at? I suppose if you're talking about data with the Crown Office, the Scottish Court Service, perhaps in Livingston, there's a shared campus with the Scottish Courts Tribunal itself. So these things still being actively explored, opportunities for a sort of cost benefit there?
Yeah, they absolutely are, and it sounds as though we painted a pessimistic position around the estate, for example. So over the course of this current financial year, we've delivered on something like 139 projects to improve and enhance our facilities. We've got 400 locations across Scotland, about 70 of them are co-locations, and the evidence really tells us that where we can co-locate with key partners, we make some really pertinent inroads. So as we go into the next financial year, we will still be as ambitious as we can be within the estate space, but set against a 5-year capital plan of spending 296 million, our allocation for next year will be a tiny fraction of that. So we're now starting to moderate and look at what might we do better in that space. And absolutely, we're connected across the UK in terms of data and digital. We work with National Police Chiefs Council. We work with the College of Policing, so we're trying to draw on the systems that would be used in other parts of the UK. And of course, some of the systems that we use are systems that are used UK-wide. But we have, I think, there's, pessimistically, there's definitely a tale of as 8 forces became one. We inherited a lot of legacy systems, and it's taken us some time. It's taken us until just in recent months to roll out DESK, to have a single crime recording system. So we still have a bit of a lag in terms of trying to get to the cutting edge of where we'd want to be with data and digital. But we are actively engaged both in Scotland with a range of partners, but importantly from a UK policing perspective as well.
Just to add to that and to your point around efficiency across the system and a forward look, we're in discussions and making really strong progress in terms of roads policing with transport colleagues in Scottish Government, and investing in digital technology that streamlines the process from being stopped on the roadside or being caught on the camera and all the way through the who was driving the car, return that to the police, summonsed into court, more investment around diversion schemes, in order to ensure that we are educating people around speeding, using mobile phones, seat belts, taking some demand off the courts, and at the same time working closely with other agencies to drive that efficiency. I haven't got the figures for you in terms of the number of those types of road traffic offences that go through the courts, but they are considerable, and I think there is a strong momentum around digitising all of that, and with a focus around education.
Okay. I mean, I think this whole area of collaborating for the successor committee to determine, but I think this will be an area of, or should be an area of interest to our successor committee, the area of collaboration. Just one final, very straightforward question, which you may or may not have the answer to, and it's one I've asked, I think, pretty much everyone, and it's on the impact of increased national insurance contributions. If I could get a reminder of what the impact of that was this year, not so much the proportion that was allocated to mitigate against the actual overall cost, and if there's an assessment yet as to what the likely cost would be for this coming financial year.
Absolutely. So in terms of national insurance increases, we receive funding for 60%. 10 million is the 40%. It equates to the 40% that.
So what's the sorry? That's what I mean. What's the global sum? I could try and work out the maths there myself, but if you could tell me.
You're testing me about 25 million.
25 million. Do we know what it'll be for this coming year?
So the impact was for the current year, so that it will be that will be sort of steady state for next year in terms of the total cost for Police Scotland.
Okay, but presumably with pay increases and so on, it'll increase a little.
So I would have to the national insurance. The increase, the delta for the national insurance increase on the pay award, I would have to find that detail for you.
Okay. If we could get that, that'd be useful. And just to remind, that equated to about 500 officer salary. If I think you told us that last time.
So in terms of, you're testing me on the numbers now. 100 officers is about 3.85 million. So, yeah.
Okay. I need to get a calculator for doing this, but I think you did say 500 last time. But that's fine. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. And Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to follow up briefly on my colleague's line of questioning about digital modernisation. And DCC Spears, I think you said that it's really about body-worn cameras. Do you have any figures of what the rollout currently is, sort of percentage-wise, and what's still to be made up?
So we've moved the rollout of body worn into the west, and we're probably about 75%. So by the time we hit May, the frontline policing, which was always going to be phase one, so where the greatest impact for local communities will be seen, will be rolled out as of May. So our final stages are now in the bigger areas like Glasgow, and that's moving.
When you say 75%, do you mean throughout Scotland?
Yes.
Or, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and how much will the sort of restriction on your budget hamper that? I mean, are you going to be able to progress it at all?
We're confident we can. So part of our plan was to ensure, and in terms of our capital spend, that we've got the technology in place. So we have. So we are rightly just measuring out, our ability to roll out phase two. But phase two would be going into the sort of less front-facing roles, elements of our SCD crime division, and some of the other elements like professional standards and parts of operational support.
So you're having to prioritise basically in what areas?
So we will, but I think that the early benefits that we are seeing from the rollout of phase one is incredibly positive. So we will be keen to progress phase two. I think the key message is just set against the budget. We just have to take a moment, pause, and measure that against other elements of data and digital rollout for the year.
Just to add to that, if I can, what we'll see over time, and there'll be a lag. There'll be a lag in this. Is I'm looking forward to being able to see the impact in terms of evidence being provided to the court and early guilty pleas. So that obviously has a significant effect in terms of victims of crime, but also the efficiency of the whole system.
Yeah.
And there'll obviously be that lag by the time those cases get through. But if you think of the scale of the business that's going through the courts in Glasgow, I think this will be one of the really strong, tangible, system-wide impact of having body worn across the whole of Scotland.
Yeah, that's encouraging. The HMICS joint audit had commented that transformation in digital and estate modernisation had not been well managed or delivered at pace in the past. So do you agree with that, or would you say that's as a result of financial restrictions?
I think we would broadly agree with that. I think we recognised that probably the early part of last year. We built up a function that could administer change and perhaps less of a focus on actually delivering transformational change. And you know, we introduced a transformation director probably just over a year ago to lead on that, and we've now got a programme of building a team that can deliver on transformation, so that puts us in a good place. There is no question that the strain on the budget has a negative impact on our ability to do that. And one of the exercises that we're doing just now is looking at what are the key projects that we would want to deliver on in 26, 27, and 27, 28, because we can't do everything that's within our ambition.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
Sarah, yes.
Could I just come in on a financial technicality of when we're talking about transformation? We've talked a lot about capital today. As we transform, as we digitise our infrastructure, much of it becomes resource funding. The licence fees, from historic capital establishment and funding, we're flipping to licences, cloud software, which is resource funding. Yeah. So our balance between capital and resource needs will be significantly different in 18 months, 2 years, 5 years across the spending review. So I just wanted to sort of set that out as a picture, because I know we've been talking about both capital and resource and the intricacies of both.
But it is the balance is changing.
It will change.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sarah, just can I ask you? You spoke earlier about the inability for you to borrow as a single force. Have you had conversations with the Scottish Government and anything movement from the UK Government dialogue on all of that?
So we wrote to Mr McKee just before Christmas in November, and he is supportive of ongoing discussions. So we are picking that. I'm new in tenure, so I'm re-engaging those conversations, and it is important for us. There's lots of elements to this. There's obviously borrowing. There's reserves rollover, which will help us from a resource funding perspective. But also I'm starting to think about other areas that we are perhaps different from England and Wales, that UK government sort of wide, where we could receive income that would be incredibly helpful. I know that ACC Houston spoke to committee earlier this year about, for example, proceeds of crime, which we don't receive, and England and Wales benefit from. So there's lots of areas around Treasury funding that I want to pick up in discussions.
Are you confident that will come together, that you'll make progress on that?
We're having early discussions, so that's where we are.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're just up at the hour, but I wonder if I can just come in with a final question, Chief Constable. And earlier on in your opening remarks, one of the things that you highlighted in terms of the sort of growing spending pressure that it has is on the impact of new legislation. Probably most of it come from this committee over the last few years. But as my colleague Sharon Dowie highlighted earlier, we're just a way to consider an SSI relating to reporting around human trafficking to Police Scotland. But we're also considering the impact, essentially the impact of the HMICS report into vetting for police officers. So all these additional requirements, plus the legislative provision that's coming down the track around Victims Bill, for example, must add significant cost onto your budget. I'm just interested in a wee bit more commentary on that particular pressure.
Yeah, firstly, we're really supportive of those legislative measures, and we've advocated really strongly around PECs, which connects to vetting, and the importance of that, and then the importance of conduct regulations along some of the domestic abuse. So, as an organisation, we're really supportive of that. We recognise that does come at a cost, and I think what has changed over the last couple of years is that our interaction with government has been much more positive, in that we have quantified the financial costs of new legislation. Whilst we have no budgetary provision for this year, we are in positive discussions with the government who will work with us to support the introduction of that legislation. So I have a degree of confidence that as we go through the financial year, we'll be supported in that space. But it would be wrong for me not to highlight right now that it carries a degree of vulnerability. But I wouldn't want to lose sight of the importance of the legislation and our support for those legislative measures.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think on that we'll draw the session to a close. Thank you very much, Chief Constable, and DCC Spears and Ms Ruffhead. Thanks very much. Interesting session, and we'll just have a short suspension to allow for a changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So our next item of business is an oral evidence taking session on an affirmative instrument. And this is the Prisoners' Early Release Miscellaneous Amendment and Transitional Provisions Scotland Regulations of 2026 draft. And we're joined this morning by the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs. And I also welcome to the meeting Claire Martin, Prison Population Team Leader, Ruth Swanson, Solicitor at the Scottish Government, and Linda Pollock, Deputy Chief Executive at the Scottish Prison Service. So welcome to you all, and I refer members to paper 3, and I thank everyone who provided written submissions to the committee. So I intend to allow up to 20 minutes for this item, and so can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to make some opening remarks on the SSI. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to committee members. I'm here today to discuss the Prisoners' Early Release Miscellaneous Amendment and Transitional Provisions Scotland Regulations 2026. Let me begin by placing on record my gratitude and appreciation to Scottish Prison Service staff, Justice Social Work Services and other partners for their ongoing dedication, hard work and commitment in all that they do. As committee will be aware, a rising and more complex prison population is not a challenge that is unique to Scotland. This government has taken a range of action to tackle this situation and create a sustainable prison population. We have optimised the existing estate to create 400 additional spaces compared with 2024 and provided the Scottish Prison Service with capital funding of £355 million this year and £458.5 million next year to continue construction of 2 new prisons, and these will add 464 places. The resource budget for the SPS next year will also be increased to over £500 million, £509.3 million. In addition, we have significantly increased investment in community justice, bringing the total funding for the next financial year to £169 million. This will enable expansion of alternatives to custody, including diversion, alternatives to remand and community sentences, which we know are more effective at reducing reoffending than short custodial sentences. Despite our best efforts, the prison population remains stubbornly high, and this carries significant risks to those living and working in our prisons. Today, the prison population stands at 8,361, 13 establishments operating above design capacity and 8 at red risk status. Should these regulations be approved, they would reduce the proportion of the custodial sentence of certain short-term prisoners. They would be required to serve before they're automatically released from 40 to 30%. This change is necessary to ensure that our prisons remain safe and effective. It could result in a sustained reduction between 239 and 312 individuals, which would better support the delivery of crucial services in our prisons, pre-release planning and the safety and well-being of all those who live and work there. The change would only apply to those serving short-term sentences, with those sentenced for sexual or domestic abuse offences excluded. This recognises the barrier to reporting. This recognises the barriers to reporting in relation to these types of offences and the need to maintain the progress made in increased reporting. My officials and I continue to engage with partners to maximise planning and support for those leaving custody. Additionally, the proposed changes would not take effect until after the current emergency early release scheme ends in April, and those eligible for immediate release would be released in tranches to minimise impact on community services. I have also always been clear that there is no single or simple solution to this challenge faced by Scotland, other parts of the UK and beyond. And while this government has already taken and continues to deliver a range of action to increase the availability of alternatives to custody, a long-term change in our approach is needed. We now have the evidence-based recommendations of the Sentencing and Penal Commission, and our collective duty is to consider what measures would enable an effective justice system where prisons are safe environments focused on rehabilitation and reducing reoffending to ensure we have fewer victims and safer communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. So we'll now open up for questions. I have to say, I'm not sure that any of us want to be here in this situation today, looking at a reduction again in terms of early release. However, I wonder if I can maybe just pick up on the last early release change, which went from 50 to 40%, and maybe just ask for a wee bit more detail on the impact of that process. So, to what extent did that change in the early release time scale, to what extent did it ease the prison population? And I think that's quite important in terms of considering a further change in the early release point. So where did that go, and did that have the effect that we were hoping?
So in terms of the STP 40 programme, which is the, just for clarity, it's the 2025 Act, the anticipation was that that would reduce the population by up to 5%, but in a sustained manner. So what we know from work that Justice Analytical Services have done, that the short-term prison population between February last year and November last year reduced by 8%. And when you, obviously an additional decrease with the current early emergency programme. And if we had not taken the action we did with STP 40, it is estimated that the prison population would be higher between 260 and 390 prisoners. So it has had an impact, but we always said it would have an impact from what the population would otherwise be.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, maybe Linda Pollock, do you want to come in on that at all? Just from
yes,
the prison service
to,
point
of course. I mean, obviously we all know that the prison population is very difficult and being stubbornly high. Without this relief, as the Cabinet Secretary said, it would have been even higher for us to deal with. So without having had STP 40 and without the other emergency releases, we would be sitting significantly higher, towards 8,780 up to 9,000, which we could not manage within the prison service. So without these actions that have been taken, despite the fact we're still sitting at a high level, it would have been even higher and unsustainable and unmanageable.
Okay, thank you. Just one other question from me, Cabinet Secretary. You spoke about sort of long-term change is required in sort of our general approach, and you referenced the recent report of the Scottish Sentencing and Penal Policy Commission, and they certainly make reference to and make recommendations with regard to short-term prison sentences, insofar as they're not really an effective way to reduce reoffending and are often actually destabilising in terms of people's lives. Now, just interested in, I know we're just coming to the end of this parliamentary session, but if there's some more detail that you can maybe provide on sort of next steps on the back of the report being published, specifically with regard to short-term sentencing.
So, convener, members will recall the statement that I gave to Parliament a few weeks ago, and that was the Scottish Government's initial response to what is a very comprehensive, evidence-led report that at the very nub is pointing out that a very high prison population does not equate to a safer Scotland, and it is a clear invitation to us all to do things differently. Now, it is a very wide-ranging and comprehensive report. We are, looking at each of the recommendations. Decisions will, of course, be for the next Parliament. But I do hope in the time that we will all have between now and then that, collectively, we can give serious, consideration to the report. There will be, there will be decisions that will need to be made or not. And given the scale of the report, it will need to, look at it in terms of, what's deliverable and in terms of prioritisation as well. But the evidence over the past decade, 2 decades, has been very clear about the ineffectiveness of short-term sentences. And we, still have, I think, a question in chamber. I think it was maybe Ms Mackay who'd asked about the numbers serving less than a year. And I think you take a snapshot on any given day, you're looking at around 500 people. The majority of short-term prisoners are serving 2 years or less. And, there's a body of evidence that where it is safe and appropriate to do so, there are better solutions that make our communities safer. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of looking at all of the recommendations collectively and individually. And I think my plea, convener, is just for us all to, I know we're all in campaigning mode, but is to find that ground where we can get consensus. Because if Parliament, and this is where I am, if we don't want to have to keep making, decisions that either give temporary relief, which early emergency release gives temporary relief, this measure will give a sustained relief going forward, but it's only one, smaller part of the jigsaw. So we need to find that longer-term, more fundamental reform for safer prisons and a sustainable population.
Okay. Thank you very much. So bring in Liam Kerr and then Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. You said this could reduce the prison population by between 239 and 312 people once fully implemented, but numerous previous schemes have failed to deliver a sustained population reduction. So what evidence is there that this change will produce a lasting structural impact rather than a short-term dip followed by a population rebound?
So if I may, Convener, remind Mr Kerr that I have always been utterly candid about the impact of each and every measure that we have undertaken. We have undertaken 2 early emergency release schemes, and I have always explicitly stated that while there are advantages to early emergency release, it does only provide a temporary relief. Sometimes up to 6 months, sometimes less. And that's because it's an emergency measure. So I've never pretended that early emergency release was anything other than temporary relief that was necessary at a particular point in time. In terms of reducing or changing the point of automatic release for some short-termers, that does give a sustained reduction from what the population would otherwise be. Obviously, I'm not in control of the inflows into our prison system, but as I quoted earlier to the convener's question, that STP 40 did have, and going forward, did have an impact on the short-term population. This measure, again, I've given the figures earlier, I won't repeat them, will reduce the population a sustained way from what it would otherwise be. But let me be clear, you know, there is no one solution here, and I can assure you this government has never pretended otherwise. There are bigger, more fundamental reforms that are required.
So the reoffending rate currently is about 44%. What impact does your evidence or your data, which presumably has been collated, suggest that this move will have on the reoffending rate? And if that shows, or indeed none has been taken, that the reoffending rate will rise due to perhaps fewer prison interventions or the fact that post-prison through care is voluntary, how will this achieve a sustained reduction in the prison population if reoffending is going up?
So I think it was questions from the convener when I gave the original statement. In fact, it was the convener. I made the political commitment that we would, in due course, review STP 30 if Parliament agrees to it in the same fashion that we've got a legislative commitment to review STP 40. And, you know, I stand by that commitment. The return to custody rate, which is of course different from a re-offending rate, but the return to custody rate for the first early emergency release was 13% out of 477 releases. The exact figure, it was, I think it was 57? 61. And in terms of the STP 40 programme, the return to custody rate was 5%, which equated to 12 or 13 individuals. Now, I appreciate that return to custody is not the same as a reconviction rate, and the figures that Mr Kerr refers to is, if I recall correctly, the reconviction rate for very short-term sentences of a year, I think, or less than 4 years. I think you quoted 40%.
I quoted a 44% reoffending rate.
For which group?
If I may, Cabinet Secretary, actually, because I would like to ask you about that reoffending rate rather than the return to custody, because you were right, to be fair, you were right to concede they are two very different things. Can you tell the committee what is the reoffending rate of those who have been released under the emergency release legislation, and indeed since the change to 40% was made, as against the mean reoffending rate?
I don't think we have that information. We have and I'll ask last policy to come in a wee moment. I'll ask Claire Martin to come in. There is a plethora of statistics around reoffending, and that relates to, you know, broadly short-term prisoners, long-term prisoners, and you know, the Risk Management Authority do work around, you know, particular categories of offenders, and because all of this is because reoffending is the statistics are there's quite a lag, you know, so I don't have that spontaneous information that, you know, Mr Kerr and others may wish to seek. But Claire, can you add to that, please?
Yeah, so we have the returns to custody rate for the initial releases under the 2025 Act, which was, as the Cabinet Secretary said. We don't have a reoffending rate specific to that release process. We do publish our reconviction rates, but there is a bit of a lag, as Cabinet Secretary said, as we do need to wait for a time period to pass before we can look at that. But there will be a statutory review next year on the changes made by the 2025 Act, and we'll be able to look at that in more detail at that point.
Thank you. Final question from me, Convener, if I may. Just a very quick one, Cabinet Secretary. If you wouldn't mind confirming, just for the records, that there is no governor's veto on this, such that no matter how dangerous the prisoner may seem to the governor, they cannot prevent release of that prisoner.
No, there is no governor's veto in this scheme, in the same way as that there was no governor's veto in the STP 40 programme. And the reason for that is that the justification for a governor's veto can be made policy-wise and legally because with early emergency release you are doing you're undertaking a process at pace. When you are changing the point of release for a cohort of prisoners going forward, you then therefore can't, you don't have the scope to get into governor's veto. And this is where there are advantages and disadvantages of particular schemes. I know people in terms of early emergency release value the governor's veto. But as I said, early emergency release doesn't reduce the population in a sustained way. What we have done with this proposition, as we did with the previous STP 40 programme, is that we have excluded those serving sentences for domestic abuse and sexual offences, and there are strong justifiable reasons for doing that, on the basis that there have been historical barriers to reporting these crimes, and we want to maintain public confidence for people to for women in particular to come forward and report those crimes, and there's a robust case around that. We are not attempting to create a hierarchy of offences. As I said, most short-term prisoners who are released either under this scheme that is proposed or earlier schemes are serving less than 2 years. And it is worth remembering that those who are released earlier are people who are due to return to our communities in the not too distant future and who are not subject to statutory supervision. And at the time of sentencing, the court makes a decision about whether people are subject to supervised release order, extended sentence and such like. So the court, in giving a sentence, is of course evaluating what's proportionate, what's punishment and what's required in terms of managing that future risk.
Thank you. Convener.
If I can ask for succinct questions and responses, just to allow all members to come in. And on that, I'll bring in Jamie Hepburn, then Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Convener. Just going back to, you referred, Cabinet Secretary, to the construction of the 2 new prisons. Can you just confirm again that those are still on schedule?
Yes. HMP Highland is on track for the building work to be complete later on this year, and HMP Glasgow is continuing as planned.
You said that will bring 460 additional spaces. Did you?
Yes.
Okay. One other question, Convener, on, and it comes from Annex A in the helpful letter he sent to us, Cabinet Secretary, the breakdown by year of people receiving short-term sentences. I mean, it sounds self-evident. The challenge we face here, of course, is that people keep getting sent to prison, and that drives the prison population. But there was obviously legislated for the presumption against short-term sentences. Now, I recognise, of course, we can't cut across the court's right, the judge's right to exercise their determination considering any particular case. But looking at the figures, just from the last 2 years you've given us information for, there's been an increase across all 3 groups, up to 3 months, 3 months to 6 months, and 6 months to a year. is there any sense, do we understand why that might be the case? And we can't obviously, as I say, second guess the court's determination, but do we know why that is happening?
So, I mean, like other parts of the UK and other parts of Europe, we are, contending with a rising prison population. In terms of the presumption against sentences of less than a year, I mean, it is a presumption. It's not a ban, and that has resulted in an overall reduction, but it is, it's still high. And sorry, I'm just trying to find the annex that I sent you. I don't think that's not what we're talking about. So,
I mean, the trend is, I won't give the precise figures, but basically from 22 to 23 to 23, 24, the numbers being sentenced were up, which kind of goes against the grain of a presumption against it. And it's just really to understand if we have any insight and understanding as to what's driving that.
So, I mean, it's patchy. There are, some areas of the country that we see a regular and consistent use of community disposals. And we are seeing an increase in electronic monitoring. And, all of that is absolutely welcome. It's difficult to... there is some research undertaken by the Independent Sentencing Council so that we can understand more about the use of very short-term sentences, and I think that will be helpful. I think from my own perspective, and this is perhaps less than scientific, I do consider it vital that we continue to bolster confidence in alternatives to custody and community payback orders, because community payback orders, in my view, are the lead to better outcomes. In fact, the evidence shows that in terms of reoffending, but they are focused on individual needs, individual risks. They are focused on upskilling people, and it is. I see the figures that Mr Hepburn is referring to. So, if you take, for example, 2014-15, in terms of sentences, that the breakdown of people receiving short-term sentences of up to 3 months, there was 4,103. Now, the latest figures, 23-24, 2,658. Now, we have to concede that sometimes prison is an expensive way of making things worse. And I think that would be my fundamental point, that we need to be having a hard conversation with ourselves as a country, because that is a still relatively high number of sentences, up to 3 months, and you see a higher figure for 3 to 6 months. And I would contend that while I will absolutely never overstep the mark in terms of the independence of the judiciary, but we can invest money to get better outcomes, as opposed to prison being an expensive way of making things worse.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Polly McNeill, then Kitty Clark.
Good morning. So I'm clear about the reasons why you're doing it, so I won't go into that. I think you answered a question to Liam Kerr about sort of projected reduction in the prison population of 40%. If you had the projected figure for 30%, that would be useful. But if you could also tell me, just so as I'm clear, someone who's serving a 30% of their sentence, and that you clarified there would be no supervision when they were released from prison, could those prisoners be released even earlier on home detention curfew? Apologies if you've answered this before, but just want to be clear, is you will still serve 30% of your sentence in prison, or is there any circumstances in which it could be even less than that?
So, in terms of the early emergency release programme and an STP 30 programme, what we find is when we are embarked on either of these programmes, the cohort of people who are eligible to be assessed for home detention curfew falls. So while we have been using home detention curfew increasingly so over the past few years, the numbers of HDC fall when we're doing early emergency release, and they would also remain comparatively low when you're doing STP 30, because it's essentially it's a similar cohort. And forgive me, I don't like talking about folk as cohorts, but just for simplicity. And in terms of the figures you'd asked for, projected sustained decrease in the population for these current regulations. That is up to 312, and the baseline figure 239 to 312.
Thank you. So someone who is serving their sentence at 30% won't be getting home. They'll serve that bit of their sentence in prison. Yes.
I'll get the details of because people will still be eligible for home detention curfew if they meet the eligibility criteria. So we'll still be operating home detention curfew as well as. But there is obviously, as you know, Ms McNeill, criteria for reaching for the approvals for that. But I can send that out in more detail if that would be helpful. Just to
well, I think it would be, because my next question, as you know, I've raised my concerns in the Chamber as well, but when it comes to sentencing, the public are going to find this very difficult to accept and understand. Now, this is not a different conversation about, in the longer term, you want alternatives to custody, because I do support that notion. What we're talking about is trying to get the public's head round someone who's been given a 4-year sentence. I don't know if you could do the maths for me on that. Right, only serving 30%, or 3 years might be easier. We need to be clear how much of that they are going to spend in jail. But I think the answer to my question is there are some who might not even serve that if there's a criteria. So would you agree, Cabinet Secretary, this is the difficult bit for the public to accept? That we're just not clear how much even under these proposals people will spend in jail in every case.
So if I can take those three elements, and I will try to... I will absolutely.
I don't want to rush the session, but...
No, I accept that. There's a general point about people not understanding how sentencing works now, right? And the evidence would show that in terms of the work of the Sentencing Penal Commission and also some of the work that the Sentencing Council has done as well. People don't understand how sentencing works. And many people are surprised that people are eligible for release on parole or non-parole licence, or they are surprised about the proportion that a short-term prisoner will spend in custody. And I think there's an issue there that needs to be addressed in terms of public discourse. It does, as I said, there'll be less people. There will certainly be less people going out on home detention curfew. I mean, the numbers, I think, are down to between 40 and 50? 35 today. So that's much lower than, they've been in, previous months. The only thing I would add, and we will follow up on this, but the reason there's a complexity to your question, and I'm sorry, Ms McNeill, that there's not a kind of shorter, more direct answer. What we have to remember about home detention curfew, while the minimum amount of your sentence to be served is 15%, there's also another eligibility criteria, and there's the requirement at the end that has to be met, that it's got to be, it can't be any more than 210 days. So the reality is, most people in HDC are not getting out at 15%. So it is a bit of a complex interaction, and I'm sorry about that, but we'll follow that up.
But you're kind of making the point for me, which
Absolutely.
is, right, we're struggling to understand all the how do the public understand what's going on here, because they are alarmed at the reduction to 30%, but there's further, there's further issues could mean that in certain cases people could be serving less than that.
Yeah.
I would be happy if Claire or Linda could write to the committee just to give us the figures on the calculations for short-term sentences of 4, 3 and 2 1 year, just so we can see it. I've tried to work it out myself. If you have a 4-year sentence, how much of that are you serving in jail? For transparency reasons, at least, whether people agree with it or not, I think it's very important, and that's the point I wanted to make.
I'm happy to do that, Ms McNeill, and it's also worth remembering that in terms of folk that are released on home detention curfew, that they are tagged subject to a licence and subject to recall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Katie Clark, then Sharon Dowie.
And we strongly support the need for long-term change, and will support all efforts to try and make sure that we've got a robust range of alternatives to custody available across the country, because for many offenders they are the more effective approach. In terms of these releases, however, and the particular issues that we're looking at today, would the Cabinet Secretary be able to say a little bit more about the package that's being put around about these releases? Because we know in the past there's been poor planning on occasions when there's been releases. I know some work's been going on in relation to that. And we also know that all the evidence seems to suggest that the better the planning that's put in place over a period of time, the more likely that the person will not reoffend. And Liam Kerr was talking about reoffending rates earlier on. So would the Cabinet Secretary be able to say a bit more about the package of support in terms of planning that will be available?
Absolutely, and the point about planning for release is crucial. That's why we took through the Bail and Release Act, and I've updated committee, I'm sure, around sections 12 and 13. And much of the work that has been done to support earlier release of some short-term prisoners is very much a precursor to the work that is required for sections 12 and 13 of the Bail and Release Act. I mean, where we have started from is that the vast majority of short-term prisoners are not subject to statutory supervision on release unless the court has decided otherwise. But therefore, they have always had the entitlement to voluntary aftercare. And what has happened over the past few years is that traditionally voluntary aftercare was within the remit of community justice social work, and it was utilised, and that has been expanded upon by the use of the third sector, which of course bring considerable advantages. There are advantages of having professional social workers do through care, but there are also advantages of that more bespoke third sector through care support as well. And that's why there is the new through care contract that Upside are delivering, and that actually increased the eligibility for through care, and in that it accommodates men being released from remand for the first time. But I'll ask Linda if that's okay to talk about the planning, that starts with SPS in terms of engaging with community partners, because it is crucially important.
Yes, of course, and that's something we've been working very, very hard with, particularly with our partners, so with Upside, but with other partners as well, to look more at the pre-release planning for people, so particularly around housing, the support to make sure people can get their medication, the support to meet them at the gate if required, and the voluntary through care support that there is there. So there was a large emphasis, particularly in the run-up to the emergency releases, and then STP40 that we'll carry in through and have as standard practice now in preparation for the implementation of the Act as well. So we have improved pre-release planning. And I think we are seeing and have seen through some of the emergency release and STP40 the benefit of that work. So it's something we're very much committed to, is that ongoing work with partners to support.
So I appreciate we're coming to the end of the Parliament, but it would be helpful if you could give us more information about that, because we know from all of our previous experience that's often not in place. Could I also just ask a question about victim notification? And I think this does relate to some of the issues that Pauline McNeill was exploring in terms of the complexity of the system and the fact that victims and others that have been impacted by the offender's behaviour need to rely on the information that they have, and they also often are very aware of what they understand is going to happen. And obviously these releases change the goalposts, and that the release dates are changing. And I quite understand the point you're making, Cabinet Secretary, that people don't understand how sentencing works. But what work is being done to ensure that in particular victims, but also others that might be impacted, will be aware that there's going to be a change?
Again, that is crucially important work. I won't rehearse previous debates and arguments about the need to simplify the victim notification schemes, and that was obviously a big focus on some of the work that we all did together in terms of the Victims, Witness and Justice Reform Bill. In terms of the current registration with the VNS scheme, it is 3,237, and I would concede that there is ongoing efforts required to increase awareness of the victim notification scheme and obviously to encourage and facilitate registration. Now, the majority of the registered victims is where the perpetrator is serving a long-term sentence. So in terms of registered victims where the perpetrator is serving a short-term sentence, that is 472. These figures will be a few weeks old, by the way. I'd got them because I was answering a parliamentary question. But the assurance that we can give is that for where someone is a registered victim and there's a change to the release date, they will be notified. But the point is we need to continue to increase efforts to ensure people know how to get registered, and that is work that collectively we're doing as a government with victim support organisations, but also the prison service.
Yeah. But is it fair to say that's again work for the future? And in terms of these releases, the reality is that most of the victims will not be registered from the figures you've given. Is that fair?
It's really difficult for me to say. I mean, historically, people gravitate to registration for long-term, but there will be many victims who are not registered. But we have been engaging, whether it's officials to victim support organisations. I've met with victim support organisations, and the prison service works with victim support organisations.
But we know from
to get people registered. People can still register.
I understand all the points you're making, but in terms of the previous early releases, there were very few notifications because very few of the victims were notified. And from the figures you're given, it looks as if we'll be in a similar position now. I don't know if Linda Pollock was wanting to come in.
What I would say, for the previous, for the change and for the previous emergency releases, we've done some targeted work with Victim Support Scotland, both through our website, through online and television advertising, to raise awareness, to try and encourage more people. And we will again use opportunities like this where there is increased media around it to provide the information about how people can register, to make that as straightforward as possible for them. So understanding that there's heightened awareness, we're using, along with Victim Support Scotland and Children First, to be able to get more information out to people to apply.
The figures that have been provided suggest a very low level of registration today. Is that fair?
But I think it's fair to also say there's a lot of work that has went into this over the years, and we currently have a system where people have to opt in. Now, I really don't want to incur the wrath of the convener, but we've had a very live debate about how we recalibrate that in terms of the victim information team. You know, the work to have a kind of central point of contact, the work around more facilitated conversations. But we ultimately are relying on people registering. But there's a bigger debate about how that's recalibrated.
And I'm not attempting to reopen that debate. I'm just trying to get a snapshot of where we are now, and we still are in a position where very few victims are notified, so it's likely to be a small percentage of these early releases where the victim will be notified.
And that's because we can't give people information that if we don't know they want it.
And Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. I wanted to go back in capacity, actually, right? Just looking at, I think everybody's in agreement that diversion for prosecution is a good thing, and where we can do it and where it's working, then that's something that we want to look at. But on the figures that we've been saying, the difference between the short-term sentences from 22-23 and 23-24 show that we've given out over 1,000 more short-term sentences. So there must be something that's going wrong or it's not working with diversion for prosecution. But when you answered Jamie Hepburn, you said that there was going to be another 460 spaces in the new prisons that we're building. And this short-term release is going to give us up to 312 more spaces, I think it is, in the prisons. What I want to know is, longer term, a lot of the prisoners that are in and taking up capacity are historic sexual offences that have been charged, and quite rightly they're now in prison. We've just upgraded a grooming gangs review into an inquiry, so I would probably say it's safe to say that we're going to start seeing a lot more prosecutions on serious sexual offences that will now need more spaces in prisons. So is there planning going on just now to make sure that we have space for those offenders to go into prison, and we're not going to go back here again actually saying that we're going to release other offenders early?
So there's a number of issues there, convener, and I think there's probably some misunderstanding with some of it, and some conflation with issues. So in terms of diversion from prosecution, that's not a matter for ministers, that's for prosecutors. So I'll just leave that there.
It's just the point that the short-term sentences, we've got diversion for prosecution in, but the short-term sentences are now increasing. So even though we've got that option for judges, sheriffs, we've now seen an increase of over, I think, 1,064 more short-term sentences in 23-24 than we had in 22-23. We don't obviously have the most recent figures yet, but there's still an increase in sentences, even though we've got diversion from prosecution.
So, diversion from prosecution without, stepping on the Crown Office toes, has to be where there is a identifiable need that has related to someone's offending, and that it's in the public interest. I think decisions around, I think drawing that correlation between diversion to prosecution and an increase in short-term sentences is probably a bit of a stretch. I don't think it's, I think we're probably on a different place, Ms Dowie. So. But in terms of the point, which is a very important point and a very serious point, that if as a nation we are getting better at investigating, prosecuting and convicting the most serious offenders and the most serious domestic abusers and sexual offenders, that does pose issues about the purpose of prison. And the purpose of prison is to, in my view, house those that pose the greatest risk to victims. And, we're always clear about that. There will always be a need for always be a need for prisons. But if we want our prisons to function effectively for those who pose the greatest risk, we need to have that long-term view. And I don't know if Ms Dowie was in chamber or participated in chamber when I gave the statement on the Sentencing and Penal Commission. But I couldn't be clearer that if, as a parliament, we want to move on from making decisions around early emergency release or changing the automatic release point for short-term prisoners, there is more fundamental reforms based on evidence that we need to pursue, and that other countries have reformed their prison system without compromising public safety, and therefore the question is why not Scotland? So the longer term work that I've spoke about is work, in my view, that will have to commence, but that will be for the next Parliament, and I hope that we can all engage in that constructively.
So have we done any work on increasing capacity in prisons?
Yes, well, as I said in my opening remarks, since 2024, we've increased prison capacity by 400. That has involved, bringing back, disused halls. That has involved, work in HMP Grampian, work in HMP Pullman. I also think HMP Edinburgh, so that we are absolutely maximising the existing current capacity. But there is obviously a limit to the current estate. So we have done that work. We have increased the capacity of the existing establishments. And of course, we have a prison building programme also, but we need to do other actions in terms of increasing confidence capacity of alternatives to custodial sentences, and answer some of the questions and points that have been put to us as a Parliament and as a country that have been raised by the Sentencing and Penal Commission.
If there's any other work that's getting done to increase capacity, it'd be good if we could get written to the committee to inform us then, because obviously the capacity at the moment isn't enough, and that's why we're having to do
I have written to committee about all of this. We can always reshare it, of course.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll need to move on to our next item of business, which is to consider a motion to approve the affirmative SSI, on which we've just taken oral evidence. And I don't need to remind officials that only MSPs may speak in a debate on a motion. So can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move motion S6M 20793 in her name, and to make any brief additional comments she wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Convener, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be with committee this morning. What I hope has been outlined this morning, but also in the previous statement I made with regards to these regulations, is that our prison population remains a critical risk, that we have to take further action. I have outlined the next steps that, in my view, must be taken to ensure that our prisons continue to operate effectively and safely, and that we have a duty to protect the health and safety and well-being of staff and prisoners. There are, of course, safeguards and exclusions in this programme, in that there will be no change to the release dates for those who are convicted of sexual offences or domestic abuse. This does apply only to short-term prisoners. I have always been clear that with each individual measure that we have taken, that there are always further steps on this journey. I think we are at a juncture. We now have the Sentencing and Penal Commission report, and we will all, collectively need to come to a view on that. And I reiterate the point that I made earlier. I know we're all in campaigning mode, but we will have to find the consensus ground on this, because that is in the interest of the people we serve, and also in the overall interests of our justice system. I know this is a hard decision for people. I know that it's a difficult decision. And if I can point to, some of that experience elsewhere, not for a minute to abdicate our own responsibilities here in Scotland, because I would very much contend that not taking further action would indeed be the abdication. But we have, seen other countries reform their system to good effect, and we've also seen the very difficult decisions that our colleagues in England and Wales have had to take in that over the course that they have released early more than 62,000 prisoners. But I'll leave my remarks there, Convener. I don't want to incur your wrath anymore.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. So do members have any further points that they wish to make? Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. These scenes are extraordinary. The Cabinet Secretary has justified this specific measure this morning by saying it's to achieve a sustained reduction in prison population, yet the Cabinet Secretary conceded in questions that previous measures were only about temporary relief, and all have demonstrably failed to reduce the prison population. And to say that there will be a sustained reduction on the very day that the news is wall-to-wall reporting the Scottish Government figures that the population could rise to 8,800 by July is brave, to say the least. Secondly, the Cabinet Secretary, in response to Sharon Dowie, talked about the purpose of prison being to house criminals. In fact, as the Cabinet Secretary well knows, the classical functions of prison are generally taken to be punishment, deterrence, public protection and rehabilitation. Not one of those is helped by this measure. And in fact, on the public protection, the Cabinet Secretary says victim and public safety is the priority, but she has no evidence on the impact on the reoffending rate for public safety. And indeed, we heard there won't be a review of reoffending rates until next year. We also heard that there's no governor's veto. So presumably those refused by a governor under the emergency release legislation could now automatically be set free. And finally, Convener, the Cabinet Secretary didn't mention her own figures, that of the prisoners eligible for this automatic release, nearly half have been imprisoned for non-sexual crimes of violence, and a further third, over a third, for crimes against society or crimes of dishonesty. They will be automatically released. Convener, the Cabinet Secretary says this is to manage the prison population. It's not. It's a panicked, knee-jerk, unevidenced measure which will be counterproductive in so many ways. I disagree with the Cabinet Secretary. This isn't a hard decision. It must be opposed, which is why I will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Polly McNeill.
Thank you. I want to begin by saying that, as Katie Clark said, I do agree that a longer-term strategy for prison should be based on better alternatives to custody. So I do agree with the Cabinet Secretary about reaching a consensus about that. But today we've been asked to further reduce the statutory sentence to 30%. And it wasn't that long ago that we reduced it to 40%. I have serious concerns about, in the public's mind, that kind of difficult confusion. And that certainly needs to be tidied up if you're having a longer look at sentencing, because how the public's supposed to get their head around it. I mean, albeit it may be a small number of prisoners who then are sentenced, serving 30%, who'd be in a home detention curfew, but it still means that some of those will serve even less than 30%. And I just think there needs to be a discussion around that, whether that's appropriate to have home detention curfew when you're already serving only 30% of your sentence. So a judge who sentences someone to 4 years I don't know if judges aren't going to calibrate that sentencing now, because they must know that that means that they'll only serve 30% of that. So whilst I agree with a lot what the Cabinet Secretary is saying, I am not comfortable with managing the prison population by what is a permanent statutory requirement to only serve 30% of a sentence. And the fact that there's no supervision, I realise that's where we are with short-term sentencing, but it kind of further alarms me that somebody's out at 30% and there's no requirement for supervision. I just think a longer-term look at this, you might want to consider that there are some offenders who should be under supervision even if they're not serving long-term sentences. So I just wanted to caveat my position today as to why I'll be voting against. Thank you.
If no other member wants to come in, I'll invite the Cabinet Secretary to wind up and press or withdraw the motion.
It is important, Convener, that I don't allow words to be blistered. And I do repeat what I said earlier, that this government and I have always been absolutely candid about the impact of any particular measure. And I have never sold any individual measure as the silver bullet or the cure. I suppose the only point I would make, Convener, is we have a situation in our prisons right now, and people can critique the past, debate the future, and nobody will do that, I can assure you, more than I. But the question is, what are we prepared to do here and now? And sometimes hard decisions have to be made. I move in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. So the question is that motion S6M 20793, that the Criminal Justice Committee recommends that the Prisoners' Early Release Miscellaneous Amendment and Transitional Provisions Scotland Regulations 2026 draft be approved. Are we all agreed?
No.
We are not agreed, so we will move to a vote. So all those wishing to vote in favour of the motion, raise your hands. Thank you. All those against the motion, raise your hands. Thank you. There are no abstentions. So we have 4 votes for the motion, 4 votes against the motion. So as a convener, I will use my casting vote and vote in support of the motion. So are members content to delegate responsibility to myself and the clerks to approve a short factual report to the Parliament on the affirmative instrument? Thank you very much. So this will be published shortly, and with that, thank you, Cabinet Secretary, Ms Pollock and officials for joining us this morning. We'll have a very brief suspension before we move on to our next item of business. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, members. So our next item of business today is a series of negative instruments which I will work through in turn. So our first negative SSI is the Police Service of Scotland vetting regulations of 2026. That's SSI number 2026-46. And I refer members to paper number 4, which sets out the purpose of the instrument. So can I ask whether members wish to make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument? Otherwise, are we content that this comes into force? Pauline McNeill.
No, I'm not. I appreciate that. I mean, I only had a chance to look at my papers yesterday for various reasons. The vetting, it was quite subject of a lot of discussion when the bill was passing, and the central issue wasn't the changing the regularity of vetting. The issue of concern, and to the Police Federation, was the power of the Chief Constable to do it in between the 10 years, and it's just not clear what the process is, whether it's fair or not. So I know in the note, the annex, it said that there's a summary of the consultation, but it doesn't really give you any idea about what people said during the consultation of this SSI. And I know that's because of everyone's in the same boat here. They didn't have time to really give us any. I would really rather at least we consider that next week, so I can consider whether or not I would want to annul them. I'm not saying I would. Yeah. But I just wouldn't be content for them to go on the nod for that reason. If you haven't had a chance to delve into the detail, it's not the 10-year vetting that the HMIC recommended. It just seems it's a power the Chief Constable doesn't currently have for any reason, just to say, well, we're not satisfied with you clearing vetting and therefore can have powers of dismissal. It's quite wide-ranging, and I think I just want to be sure what was said in the consultation. I would rather that we had some time, Convener.
Okay, I mean, I agree there's quite a lot in it, and if you're uncomfortable, then I certainly acknowledge your views on that. Sharon Dowie and then Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Convener. I would agree with Pauline McNeill. I think I'd like to see a wee bit more detail on it first before we put it through. Again, I don't disagree with the the Chief Constable having powers if they're required, but I think I would like to know what's included in vetting clearance. Why is it not currently in their disciplinary policies and procedures that they've actually got another way that they could actually deal with it? There's bits, and it does say to identify those who pose a potential risk to others or who are otherwise unsuitable to work within the police service. But again, why is that not within their current disciplinary procedures that you could actually get rid of somebody through that? There's also a bit in Part 8, it says during the withdrawal assessment or appeal process, a constable may be suspended provided the suspension conditions are satisfied, and any suspension must be reconsidered on a regular basis. So, again, how long would they be suspended for? What's the regular basis? And I don't know if we could get some information on how many police officers have been dismissed in the last year, how many have appealed, and how many have been overturned and how many upheld, just to give us information on what's currently happening within the police force to see why this power is needed.
Okay. I mean, I think just, I suppose on that, it was a recommendation by the HMICS, I think is my understanding of it, and it's really just to put that recommendation into effect. Jamie Hepburn.
I mean, broadly speaking, I'm pretty satisfied with it, and I think the policy note does probably explain enough, but clearly if colleagues want more information, then we can obviously look at it next week, but I'm fairly convinced we will be persuaded.
Thank you very much. And Rona Mackay.
I mean, likewise, I think there's a danger of us overthinking this, to be honest. As far as I can understand it, is to give Chief Constable more flexibility. I don't think there's anything sinister in it at all. I think it's just, as I say, just so that if circumstances change things, she has the ability to step in and do the vetting again. So I don't have an issue with it, being honest.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other queries? No. I mean, for what it's worth, I did note this morning that DCC Spears did acknowledge the the SSI regarding vetting regulations and appeared to be supportive of it. But I fully accept members' desire to have a wee bit more detail to hand before sort of agreeing. You want to come in, Sharon?
No, it was just to say I don't disagree with Jamie that once we get more information we might be happy to put it through, but I would just point out that 2 weeks ago we had an SSI where we had the Minister in, we asked questions on it, and then we got a letter 2 weeks later to say it was been withdrawn because they'd actually done more investigation into it and found that there had been issues. So I don't think it's unreasonable that we just get a bit more information before we put it through.
Okay.
There has already been court cases because probationers have been just summarily dismissed. So my issue isn't the general vetting issue. It did come up, by the way. I mean, we did raise it during the passage of the bill. I was never comfortable with this. It's sort of something the Federation think it potentially just gives a power to use vetting as an excuse to get rid of police officers, where actually there should be a process which is more transparent, and it's making sure that they go down the right route. So I think it's just that one issue.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Jamie.
Clearly, we're going to get into this more, but I would just note that if my reading of the process is correct, the final decision is not with the Chief Constable. Someone has to be appointed to look at any matter. But I just make that observation. But we're going to look at it further. Then it's fine.
Okay. So just for Pauline McNeill, obviously you can propose by motion that the Lead Committee recommend annulment of the instrument. I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at. And if if you do choose to lodge a motion, then it would need to be debated at the next committee meeting. But in any case, I'm proposing that we bring the SSI back to committee to allow further information to be obtained. Are members agreeable to that? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So our next negative SSI today is the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Duty to Notify Scotland Regulations of 2026. That's SSI number 60 of 2026. And I refer members to paper number 6, which sets out the purpose of this instrument. So can I ask whether members wish to make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument? Otherwise, are we content that this comes into force? Sharon Dowie.
Just to bring in the point that we raised earlier on with the Chief Constable on the fact, well, one, it's come in 10 years later. I think it's probably needed. It should probably have come in earlier. But just the concern on, are we giving the proper authorities the amount of funding that they will need to make sure that it's implemented properly?
Okay, thank you. Just 1 second. Okay, thanks very much. Just jumping ahead again. Okay, thank you for that point, Sharon Dowie. Any other members wish to come in? Okay, thank you very much. So can I ask members whether members wish to make any recommendations? Otherwise, are we content that it comes into force? Just to clarify that. Thank you very much. So our next SSI, negative SSI today, is the Police Pension Scheme Scotland Amendment Regulations of 2026. That's number 58 of 2026. And I refer members to paper 5, which sets out the purpose of the instrument. And I declare an interest here as a previously serving police officer in Police Scotland. So can I ask whether members wish to make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument? Otherwise, are we content that it comes into force? Content? Thank you very much. So our final negative SSI today is the Parole Board Scotland Amendment Rules of 2026. That's SSI number 82 of 2026. And I refer members to paper 7, which sets out the purpose of the instrument. And can I ask members whether members wish to make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument? Otherwise, are we content that this comes into force? I'm content. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So that concludes our consideration of SSIs and I'll suspend very briefly to allow witnesses to join us at the table. Okay, thank you, members. So before we move on to our next item of business, we have run over fairly considerably this morning. So with members' agreement, I would propose that we may, if required, drop the final two items of business, which is our review of evidence from this morning and our consideration of our annual report, and we can bring those back. Are members content if that is necessary to do so? Thank you very much. Okay, so our next item of business is the start of a series of evidence sessions with our different inspectorates and commissioners within our remit. And our aim is to seek out their views on the state of the criminal justice system and the challenges for session 7, which will then inform also our legacy work for our successor committee. So I'm very pleased that we're joined this morning by Robert Scott, Chief Inspector, HM Fire Service Inspectorate in Scotland, and I refer members to paper 8. And I intend to allow up to 45 minutes for our first witness. So can I invite Mr Scott to make some opening remarks?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, committee members. As the Convener said, my name is Robert Scott and I'm His Majesty's Chief Inspector of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. My career in the Fire and Rescue Service started quite some time ago in 1989 when I joined the Fire Service as a young firefighter and worked my way through the ranks and retired in 2017 as Assistant Chief within Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. I was appointed as Chief Inspector in 2021 and very proud to hold this position. The Inspectorate in Scotland, like many other bodies, is a completely independent entity. It sits within Scottish Government but is independent of Scottish Government and also independent of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. And the role of the Inspectorate, which was first established in 1948 and has remained pretty much unchanged throughout that period, is to provide ministers and the people of Scotland with that assurance that the Fire and Rescue Service is operating efficiently and effectively, and also in line with the principles of best value. So we take that role very seriously and we carry out our functions by carrying out a range of inspections across the country and specifically into themes that we deem to be relevant at the particular time. We work with the Fire and Rescue Service whilst maintaining that professional distance that our independence demands, and we publish reports which are laid in Parliament with recommendations for improvement within them. So we have within the paper included an appendix that shows some of the reports that we have published recently, and I think if we total up the recommendations and areas for consideration within those reports, it's somewhere in the region of 200 recommendations for improvement. And it's very pleasing for me as Chief Inspector to see those improvements being considered and actioned by the service and turning into genuine improvement for the Fire and Rescue Service that serves the people of Scotland. So I take that matter very seriously, and it's a great pleasure to be invited along here today, Convener, to give any evidence that committee members wish to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I mean, I think it's safe to say that Scottish Fire and Rescue Service has been going under some has been going through some very significant change over decades, probably, from the first significant amalgamation of individual fire services right up to today, where we're seeing a really shifting service delivery demand, less fires but more major incidents, weather-related events, and a lot of very, very good partnership working. So I think it just bearing that in mind, how easy or difficult has that made your role? And I'm very interested to hear your comments from the inspectorate perspective on the way in which Scottish Fire and Rescue has been able to adapt to the sort of natural changes in operational demand, but also their more sort of coordinated reform agenda, which they're in the midst of at the moment.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, a period of change over quite some time, and during my time in the service involved in that reform process, I think it's very pleasing to see the reduction in fires and the resulting fatalities and injuries that come from those fires, and I think the service, as well as other partners, have to be congratulated for that success. The prevention agenda has certainly been a real success story in Scotland and across the UK, in fact. And without losing sight of that, firefighters are still required to respond to emergencies. And as you say yourself, those emergencies and the face of those emergencies is ever-changing. Climate change has had a massive impact on the number of events that the Fire and Rescue Service now attend, and the severity and ferocity of some of the wildfires that we saw last year was something that we were unfamiliar with, perhaps, and need to reflect on and improve as we move forward. The service has, I think, taken a mature approach to reviewing its service delivery model, and the consultation process that has recently closed and is now being considered we see as a positive. We have been involved in observing that process from the analysis of the initial data that formed the long list of options to attending the various forums and public consultations across the country, so that we could have an informed opinion on the approach that was taken. And we now await, obviously, the board's decision on what that final picture will look like. But I think in terms of that responsibility we have to ensure best value, it is entirely appropriate that the service reviews the activity, the demand and the risks that the people of Scotland now face compared to what was put in place, and why those fire appliances and those fire stations are where they are right now. And it's relevant that they do that from time to time. I think, though, from our research and our inspections of late, where we see some challenges are that some of the benefits of that process really need to be reinvested in other parts of the organisation. And we've highlighted this on a number of occasions around areas such as the training of firefighters and the development of middle and senior managers. There needs to be some thought given to how that can improve, and that will require investment. And also on the capital front, as you know, members of this committee will have heard from the Chief Officer and from the Fire Brigades Union that the property estate in particular in Scottish Fire and Rescue Service needs significant improvement. And again, this is something we've highlighted in our inspection reports, and we would like to see some investment in those areas that require to be upgraded. So I'm not sure if that answers all of your question, Convener, but hopefully it does.
No, that's very helpful. And, I should say that we have a very regular engagement with Scottish Fire and Rescue and the Fire Brigade Union, as you've highlighted, and very interested in the point that you've made about perhaps looking more closely at how that benefit of reform can be reinvested into other areas across the service. Just picking up on the point that you made about sort of property and estate, and of course that comes up probably at every session that we have with colleagues. One of the things that we've been looking at recently has been linked to the climate change plan, and obviously what's going on across public services in relation to essentially reducing carbon emissions. And obviously that's an area that Scottish Fire and Rescue have been active in, and we took evidence from the Chief Officer on that recently. And that's not in relation to the operational response to climate-related incidents, but more about how the service is reducing its carbon footprint. Is that an area that you've looked at to date within your inspectorate role, and be interested in any sort of commentary that you may have on how the service can further address climate change by way of reducing carbon emissions across the estate.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's not one that we have specifically carried out a thematic inspection on. However, when we have carried out our service delivery area inspections in the east, west and north, it's certainly an observation that we've made around the good practice in relation to bringing in electric vehicles where it is suitable to do so. And it tends to be in the smaller vehicles rather than in the fire appliance side of the business, albeit that the service have trialled an electric fire engine in their station in Clydesmill and Cambuslang. So there is scope for that technology to move forward, but at this moment in time, with a fleet of something like 600 or 700 fire appliances and the cost associated with moving those to electric and the infrastructure required for charging, etc., it's a longer-term vision, not a short-term vision. But I think the service have been responsible in relation to the small vehicles that their officers drive about in and that they deliver their kit and equipment in, and moving to a more electric fleet where it is viable to do so. So we have reflected that within reports, and also I think within some of the stations that technology that's available in terms of heating and solar panels and moving away from reliance on fossil fuels. The service have certainly shown examples of where that's possible. But, you know, on the operational side of things, we have done some work around the impact of climate change, and it's maybe something that you would want to come on to later on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'll open up to members now, and I'll bring in Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Mr Scott. A couple of quick questions on the service delivery. This committee's heard from the FBU and from the service about the recruitment and indeed retention pressures that they're facing. Do you get any sense that these pressures are having an impact on the service delivery, and if so, what needs to be done?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Kerr. Within the rural parts of Scotland and the predominance of Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, I think over 280 of the 356 fire stations are staffed by on-call firefighters wearing a pager and making that tremendous commitment to respond to incidents when required. And we heavily rely on these fantastic people up and down the country. It is proving incredibly difficult to attract people to that duty system for various reasons. Some occasions, as you know, it's challenging for them to be able to provide that commitment whilst working in other areas further away from their homes and therefore not being available to respond at certain times of the day. And also, I think there's just that understanding that the commitment is all-consuming, and it prevents them from carrying out other social activities or doing things with their families that they might wish to otherwise do. So I completely understand why people might feel reluctant to take part in that process, but it does have an impact, obviously, on service delivery. If these fire appliances are not available, then fire appliances from further afield need to respond in their place. However, I think looking at the outcomes and the statistics around fire activity and the improvements that have been made since Scottish Fire, it's not yet at that pressing emergency stage where we need to be panicking about it. I think the service are trying their hardest to recruit. We've made some recommendations about recruiting more locally rather than nationally. We've made some recommendations about speeding up the process, and it's pleasing to see these things turning into actual improvements over time. But it is a challenge that exists in Scotland, and a challenge that exists across the whole of the UK, actually. It's not unique to Scotland. The service, I believe, have a working group set up to look at the whole issue of on-call firefighters and are working towards having alternative options available. At this moment in time, I couldn't give you any more detail on what that final picture might look like.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. Just to stay on that point then, there's obviously an awful lot of work being done to address these challenges at the operational level. But obviously this committee is very keen to guide a future Parliament on how to do what it can to assist. So is there anything in your view, particularly sitting where you do, that you want to say to, well, this Parliament, but the successor committee in Parliament, to say, I need this from you in order for the fire service to address these challenges?
Yeah. At times it's very easy for me to make recommendations that are very difficult to deliver against. So, if we had resource that was permanent resource, full-time resource, in pockets of Scotland where they could assist with that response model, then that would certainly help. Almost a hub-and-spoke approach, where we would have full-time appliances based in parts of Scotland that would allow these full-time firefighters who are available 24/7 to respond with their on-call part-time colleagues to make that system a bit more resilient. However, you can imagine that type of model comes at a cost, and when the Chief Officer is trying to deliver his service within a limited budget, then he has to take that into consideration. So when we make recommendations, we try to make recommendations that are achievable and affordable, albeit we don't shirk away from pointing out the areas that just require to be resolved.
And do you get any sense, this is, as you've rightly said, a very challenging job, but everyone has enormous admiration for the courage of these people. But it's obviously going to be very difficult in this environment. Do you get any sense that workforce morale is having any impact on operational delivery?
I think workforce morale is a very difficult thing to measure. It's very difficult for us to measure because we're not in and about every fire station in every part of Scotland. And I think morale will differ depending not only on geographical location or duty pattern, but on some occasions you could go into the same fire station with one group of individuals working and morale will be different to when you go in on the night shift and another group are working. It's very individual and challenging for us to measure. However, from my experience of being a firefighter for many years and being involved with the Fire and Rescue Service for many years, regardless of morale, I believe that when firefighters respond to incidents, all of these things are set aside and they respond in a professional manner to the best of their ability, regardless of personal feelings or anything that might be going on in their own lives or in their work lives. So I don't think it has an impact on response in any way, shape or form.
Very grateful.
Okay, thank you very much. Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Mr Scott, you said you've been a firefighter for many years, and in your opening statement you mentioned climate change.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you about sort of resilience and preparedness for the changing circumstances. Can you give us a flavour of how that's changed over the years and how prepared the service is now to deal with things like flooding and wildfires, etc.?
Yes, thank you. That's a very interesting question, and I can certainly speak from experience of seeing that very real change that climate change has brought about. The number of wildfires that Scottish Fire Rescue Service attend now is much greater than it was when I joined the Fire and Rescue Service, and the ferocity of those incidents is also much greater. Flooding as well, obviously these things are seasonal, and flooding has also increased, and the response to flooding is now obviously something that firefighters do routinely, whereas when I joined the Fire and Rescue Service, flooding was not something that was routine for fire and rescue services to attend, as they were fire brigades back in that day. So the role has widened, and therefore the responsibility has widened. In terms of preparedness, I think it's an ever-changing picture. I think it's a responsibility that the service takes very seriously, and it's pleasing to see Scottish Government taking very seriously. And I was lucky enough to be invited along to the Wildfire Summit that took place last year in Granton on Spey, and attended that and contributed to that discussion. And it's pleasing to see a wildfire strategy being developed that doesn't only focus on the Fire and Rescue Service response, but also focuses on other partners' role in prevention and response, and the value that can be added by landowners and land managers and estates and other individuals. And I think taking that holistic approach to the issue is exactly the right way to go, and I'm very pleased to continue to be involved in the governance of that wildfire strategy and the oversight of improvement. I think this is an issue for society, not just for the Fire and Rescue Service, although we obviously have a role to play in the response.
Yeah, no, thank you. I completely agree with you. It's about collective responsibility. Everybody has to play a part, and it's encouraging to know that the fire service is dealing with it. Are there any gaps in equipment that you have? Is it up to the job? And what about training of officers? Do they need special training and that kind of thing?
Yeah, again, it's an ever-changing landscape. We carried out a review of the operational response to climate emergencies in 2023, and I'm already thinking 3 years later that we need to do this again, because we made comment then around the suitability of equipment, the disposition of assets across Scotland, and I'm already, based on the activity levels over the past couple of years, thinking that we need to revisit this and to determine whether we are still satisfied that the right things are in the right places and that our firefighters have got the right equipment and the right training. So, yeah, even in that short space of time, I think things have moved on significantly.
It's sort of ongoing evaluation you have to keep doing.
Through the wildfire strategy that I referred to earlier, that has been worked up by colleagues across Scottish Government and the service and other partners, through that piece of work, there is that evaluation of equipment required, and the service have made a significant investment last year in 4x4 vehicles, off-road vehicles, specific personal protective equipment for firefighters carrying out these functions, because it's an incredibly onerous and challenging environment to work in. To work on a hillside for 4-6 hours tackling a wildfire, if you're not wearing the right equipment, if you're wearing equipment that was designed to put out fires in houses rather than something more lightweight, it can be very taxing and very distressing for firefighters involved.
Thank you. And just finally, so Glasgow is going to be hosting the Commonwealth Games this year. I'm guessing you're going to say that everything's in place for that, and that the fire service will be completely prepared for that, because generally with these big events you are. But can you maybe just reassure us that all's going to plan?
Yeah, and we're in the process of reviewing that preparedness for the Games. I think it's fair to say that the Games are a much smaller event this time round than they were the last time they came to Scotland. And part of the benefit in that reduction for the Fire and Rescue Service is around there being no athletes' village on this occasion. So athletes are staying in hotels which are already certified and regularly inspected, and we have comfort in their safety measures. Whereas when the Games last came, part of the role for the Fire and Rescue Service was to ensure that the athletes' village was fit for purpose in relation to fire safety. And that took a lot of resource to go and carry out those inspections, obviously, and have that satisfaction. Also, the venues that are being used on this occasion are tried and tested venues, and the fire service already have response plans to those venues. So in a lot of ways, for individual venues, it's almost business as usual. It's something that could happen on any occasion at those types of venues. The difference being, obviously, that multiple venues, multiple locations are being used at the same time, and therefore that makes it a little bit more challenging. But the service, along with other agencies, are working to create that multi-agency response plan. We've been observing that in action. We're going to go along and observe some of the training and exercising that's planned to take place in advance of the Games. But I'm absolutely confident that the service are moving in the right direction and working with others to ensure a safe and secure Games for Glasgow.
Thank you. That's really reassuring. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Fulton McGregor and then Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Convener. Just a very general question. Do you have any thoughts or insights on how the fire service can almost bring together, if you like, the sort of views sometimes of the leadership and those on the ground? And the reason why I ask that is because we often get in this committee over a range of different issues. We often get very good updates from the leadership. We get very good updates from the union or from individual fire personnel, as constituency MSPs. And sometimes they seem to be in conflict with each other. And often I think everybody's just wanting the same thing. But and there's been a run of sessions even recently, for example, and the individual firefighters, which I would never name, obviously, have actually contacted me following those to say that they disagreed with some things that were said. And I just wonder, in your role, is there anything, and it's maybe not for a big, massive answer, and it's only so much of your role, I know I understand that, but I wonder if there's anything in your role that you think can be done to maybe bring those kind of views together, because I think there's a lot of merit in both from when we hear it, but it's quite hard for us as politicians in a committee often to get a true understanding of what's actually going on there. Have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's something that we come across during all of our inspections, to be honest with you, because when we carry out inspections, we tend to take views from the leadership of the organisation, but we also then go out and speak to firefighters in stations across the country, and we take the views of many other stakeholders and those working in corporate functions within the organisation, not only uniformed colleagues, and we try and consider each of those views and reflect them back within the reports. And sometimes when we're going through the consultation on our final reports, we'll get pushback from managers to say, well, that's not the situation, that's not the truth, that's not what's actually happening. In reality, it might be what a firefighter in one station has told you. The approach that we take to that is that we never take the view of an individual as being the gospel. We consider that in the round, and also if that view is reflected by multiple individuals in multiple locations, then it starts to have, at the very least, a perception that needs to be addressed. And at the very least, there's an issue then with internal communications, and we reflect that back to the service to say, if multiple people in multiple places are telling us that this is an issue, and you're telling us it's not an issue, then at the very least there's an issue with internal communications, and you need to improve the systems of briefing your own staff as to what is actually happening. We don't shy away from that. We publish the views of those individuals where they are triangulated and from multiple sources. And we then also publish, in contrast to that, the view of management and leadership where that is different, and we draw conclusions between the two. So that's the way that we approach it. And I think, you know, being slightly defensive perhaps of the Fire and Rescue Service, which is not my role to do, but they have an incredibly small team working within the communications department, and this is a reflection based on my earlier comments about the need to reinvest in some parts of the organisation. I think as a benefit of reform, we've saw significant financial savings in the Fire and Rescue Service, something like £900 million having been saved since the advent of the single service. But some areas of the organisation now need to be invested in. Communications, legal, prevention teams, training teams, these things need additional resources, and that reinvestment is required as a matter of urgency. And I think, you know, that's an example of perhaps where that falls down, where firefighters believe one thing, management believe another, and there needs to be better communications to resolve that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Frank, Councillor, cheers.
Thank you. Pauline McNeill, then Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Ellis. It was just in relation to your, I know your statutory role is to review and inspect the statutory functions and performance of the Fire and Rescue Service, but it can't escape your notice that we've been hearing evidence from the Fire Brigade Union and from the Chief Fire Officer himself talking about the impact of the budget, and you know there's an ongoing consultation in relation to fire stations, so we do expect some closures. Is that something that you would incorporate into your, I suppose, your role to comment on the impact of these types of decisions on the statutory function of the Fire and Rescue Service? I'm thinking here that, you know, their statutory requirement is to respond to a fire, but surely there must be more than that, because obviously the concern is that the response times could increase, and that could cost lives or damage to property.
Yeah, and I think it's a very relevant point. Just to put that into context, the size of my team in The inspectorate is very small. I have myself and 3.5 full-time equivalent inspectors to carry out our function as an inspection body. So instead of carrying out the exact same work that the Fire and Rescue Service are doing and arriving at a different conclusion, what we prefer to do is observe the mechanisms that they have put in place, and we have attended on many occasions and had briefings on the approach that they have taken to arriving at their final decision, and we make observations on that and we give advice to ministers based on that process rather than on the final outcome. Because I think if we kept just providing our own view on the final outcome, then we'd almost be mirroring the role of the fire chief and the fire board, and I don't think that's our job to do that. But what we did want to do was satisfy ourselves that the process that had been put in place, the data that had been analysed was robust, the risks that had been considered were the right risks, and the evidence was there to support that, and also that the consultation process had been carried out in a very fair manner and had included a range of stakeholders and had been then considered once that consultation was concluded, and that consultation had influenced the final outcome. And that's the stage we're at the moment, because the board obviously haven't made the final decisions on what that final picture would look like. So I don't think we would want to get involved in the space where we say, don't close this fire station, close that one instead, because I think we then step into a role that is not really our position to be in. However, if we felt that the final picture was having an impact on the effectiveness of the service, then I think that is very much my duty to step in at that point and to make comment. But until we know what that final picture looks like, it's hard to say anymore.
Thank you very much.
Does that help?
Okay, thank you. And Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. It's actually following on for the questions that Rona Mackay was asking earlier. It was just to see if you could give us more information in the procurement process. It was obviously talking about wildfires and the equipment needed to go and fight it. We obviously know that budgets are tight. So how does the procurement process work to make sure that firefighters are getting the equipment they need to ensure their safety, but also it's fit for purpose for the job that's required?
Yeah, I don't pretend to be an expert in procurement, unfortunately, in terms of the legalities of it. But I know that the service have a capital plan, which is a flexible plan and will move depending on the needs of the organisation. So the senior leadership team set what that capital plan is going to look like and how they're going to spend the money that is available to them. And they obviously plan according to needs of the organisation. So within that will be the purchase of new vehicles, the purchase of new equipment, the refurbishment of fire stations, and any repairs that need to be made to existing stock. Within that capital plan, obviously, if, as we see now, wildfire becomes a priority, then with that limited amount available to the Fire and Rescue Service, they have to make choices of how they'll spend their money, when they'll spend their money, and whether it's indeed possible to go through the exercise within the financial year and spend the money that's available now, or whether that needs to span more than 1 year or move into subsequent years. So all of those decisions are made by the senior leadership team and then proposed to the board as a final capital plan for signing off on. We don't tend to get involved in that unless we feel that there is a need for something to be improved, and then we make recommendations for that improvement. I should have said at the start, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, but the recommendations within my reports, the service must have regard to them. They don't have to actually comply with those recommendations. They're not legally bound to do what we suggest, but they are legally bound to have regard. And generally, the approach that we've taken since I've been the Chief Inspector has been one where we agree those recommendations and they are generally actioned, and I observe that action in progress and can see the move from action to improvement in real time. So that's, and your procurement falls within that. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's fine. And just one thing, I don't know whether you'll know the answer to this one. One of the recent things that's been brought in, we've spoke about the problems with recruitment and retention. So one of the things that I've been told has recently been brought in was the introduction of colour vision testing for firefighters. It's just to see whether you can give us an insight on what the benefit was going to be for that, because I'm told that there's actually appliances that can be off the run because somebody's not allowed to work because they've failed the colour blindness test. I don't know if if you could give me more information on that.
I think all of the testing that takes place within the Fire and Rescue Service for recruitment, either into whole-time or on-call or various roles, is based on national best practice set by the National Fire Chiefs Council. I can understand why that might be frustrating at times for individuals to say, I'm perfectly capable, I'm perfectly willing, I'm available to do this role, but I don't meet the national standard. Obviously, the organisation has a responsibility to ensure the safety of those people employed, and if there is a relevance to a particular test within the role of the individual and what they're being asked to do, then clearly they are going to apply that in a manner that's consistent with national practice. So colour blindness is an issue in the Fire and Rescue Service. There are occasions when firefighters are dealing with electrical supplies or perhaps hazardous materials that are badged up with various colours on their logos and their symbols. Firefighters need to be able to recognise that and relay that information back to their control rooms and their colleagues outside the incident so that the incident can be dealt with safely. So I know colour blindness might feel as though that's not really that essential in the fire service, but it genuinely does have a reason for being a test.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just staying on some of the kind of operational delivery issues that have been flagged during committee sessions, I wonder if you can maybe provide an update on your work programme in terms of some of them. So, for example, recruitment of retained firefighters, the issues around decontamination facilities and fire stations and the sort of associated compensation risk around that. But also the operational impact of RAC in, I think it's about 14 stations where RAC has been found. I think the other thing that comes up obviously is response times, but I think you maybe answered a question from Pauline McNeill around that. So are these issues that you have on your ongoing or your future work programme?
Yes, Convener. We capture a lot of these things when we do our service delivery area inspections. So just about 4 years ago, I was fairly new into post. We moved away from a regime of inspecting the fire service at a local authority level and moved to inspecting at a service delivery area level. And we've done that for a very good reason, in that I think when the single service came into being, there was a real desire to understand and to appreciate that the fire service, albeit national, was being delivered in line with local needs, and local authorities, obviously, who had previously had control of the fire service, wanted to ensure that they still had a role to play in the delivery of the fire service. So the inspectorate at the time elected to inspect the fire service delivery at a local authority level. 8 years later, when I came into post, we had carried out 16 of those local authority inspections and still had then another 16 local authorities to inspect. So you could see that it was going to be quite some time before we completed the cycle. So we took the decision to move to service delivery area inspections and to inspect against a number of themes within those east, west and north inspections. We've now completed all 3 of them and published all 3 reports, so I can give a picture of service delivery across the whole of the country, which would have taken me quite some considerable time longer to do. And within that, we look at prevention, response, people and partnership as themes within those inspections. And some of the stuff that you talk about there, recruitment and RAC panels, are mentioned within each of those reports. Where we feel then that there is a need for us to take a deeper dive into that, we use those service delivery area inspections as a mechanism for determining our programme of thematic inspections, and those thematic inspections tend to take a much more focused look at a particular element of the service's delivery. So an example of that is training. So during the service delivery areas in east, west and north, all 3 of them highlighted that training was not where it should be, and we put recommendations within each of those reports. But I then chose to build on that, given the risk-critical nature of training for firefighters. I chose to build on that by instructing a thorough review of training and officer development in the organisation, and that report is in the final stages of being drafted. In fact, the first draft came to me yesterday, and the report will be laid in Parliament early in June, and it will make a number of recommendations within that for improvements in the training sphere. So that's how we kind of mentioned that. The RAC roofing we have mentioned on all three of those reports. We've called for the service to resolve the issues of RAC roofing as an urgent priority. But again, going back to the point I made earlier about being realistic in our approach, this is an issue that needs to be resolved. We understand that the organisation has to find the money to make those repairs within a very limited capital budget. But it doesn't mean that we should not highlight it, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't bring it to the attention of ministers and the people of Scotland that this is an issue that needs to be resolved, as well as other issues in stations that you're well aware of in relation to contaminants and dignified facilities, which again we touch on in each of those service delivery area inspection reports. So, I hope that helps, Convener, to paint the picture.
Yes, it does. And I suppose just my final question, I suppose just staying on that very important inspection work, have you found in your time that there have been recurring themes have cropped up along the way that maybe sort of suggested some kind of more systemic issues or concerns that might raise?
Yeah, I think there are a number of recurring themes across each of the service delivery area inspections. As I mentioned earlier, training is a recurring theme that comes to the fore. Leadership development for middle and senior managers is an issue that is mentioned routinely during our inspections, as well as those that require a long-term sustained investment, such as the RAC roofing problems and the general decline of the property estate and the need for investment to resolve issues related to contaminants and also dignified facilities. To have fire stations that don't have running water or have access to very limited shower facilities for firefighters to decontaminate after incidents is not acceptable, and we mention that in each of our reports, and we call the service to take action. Again, understanding completely that they have a limited and finite pot of money with which to do that. We also draw out other issues within the reports in relation to people and to partnership. I think the service are tremendous partners and are involved in a range of issues that are not necessarily fire related, but add tremendous value in a community planning context, and I think as well as providing recommendations on areas for improvement, we're also very keen to show areas of good practice, and we reflect a number of those within each of the reports that we publish as well.
Yeah, and I would just endorse and commend the partnership working that Scottish Fire and Rescue is involved in, really strong partnership approaches, which is something we can be very grateful for and proud of. I suppose just finally, do you have sufficient staffing and financial resources?
I'm probably in the minority of people here to say I think I probably do. I think I do have enough resource to carry out the role in the manner in which we carry it out now. If I had more resource, what would I do with that? I think I would love to be able to go back more often and examine the progress and almost re-inspect against certain recommendations to ensure that we are completely satisfied. We don't have a legal requirement to do that because, as I said earlier, the service must have regard. They don't actually have to take those actions. And we cover it off by me attending various board committees and seeing those action plans progressing through those committees and being scrutinised and monitored. And I'm able to ask questions and to monitor the progress in that way. If I had more resource, I would probably use it in that way. And I would also like to do more benchmarking across the rest of the UK to understand best practice in other services. But with the limited resources that I have at the moment, I'm unable to do that. But understanding the bigger financial picture and the challenges facing the government and the country, yeah, I would say that we are adequately resourced to carry out our role, and I think our role adds tremendous value.
Thank you very much. That makes a change. So on that, thank you very much. I think that concludes our session. If there are no more questions, thank you for coming in and joining us this morning. And we'll just have a very short suspension to allow a changeover of witnesses.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, committee members.
Okay, thank you very much, members. So I'm very pleased that we're now joined by Laura Payton, Commissioner, and Philip Chapman, Director of Operations at the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner. And I refer members again to paper number 8, and I intend to allow up to 45 minutes for this session. So can I invite Ms Payton to make some opening remarks?
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to the committee for inviting us to speak about the work of PERC today and the state of the criminal justice system and the challenges that lie ahead for us. As members will know, PERC plays a key role in promoting improvement and public confidence in policing across Scotland through independent oversight. And over the past year, a key challenge for PERC has been managing increased demand, and that applies across our two main business areas of investigations and reviews. In terms of investigations, there's been two main drivers to our increase in our investigation caseload. So first, since the 1st of January 2025, PERC has been applying to the cases we investigate changes to the law on corroboration arising from the Lord Advocate's references. That resulted in a 239% increase in the number of investigations commenced between January and March 2025 compared to the same period the previous year. Second, there's also been an increase in the number of death investigations we're required to carry out at the direction of the Crown Office. So far this year, the number has increased 95% compared to the same period in the previous 2 years. We aim to complete thorough and timely investigations, but the recent increase in demand has had a real impact on what we are able to deliver. And while we remain focused on delivering high-quality investigations, we will not be able to complete investigations as quickly as we would like. That means that complainers, next of kin and the officers who are subject to investigation will wait longer for an outcome. It also has an impact on our staff who are carrying heavy caseloads. My priority has been and will continue to be our investigations into deaths, where the next of kin, families and wider communities are waiting for an answer and must have confidence in PIRC's ability to conduct thorough inquiries into any death in custody or death following police contact. In terms of our reviews work, where a member of the public has made a complaint to a policing body and is dissatisfied with the response they receive, they can then apply to PIRC for a complaint handling review. And members may be aware that Police Scotland is dealing with a significant backlog of complaints currently. As Police Scotland addresses its backlog, more complainers will become eligible to apply to PIRC for a review, and we've projected a 250% increase in applications to PIRC. In real terms, that means around 350 additional applications for a complaint handling review. So our focus this year has been on how we manage that increased demand while trying to maintain the service we provide. And of course, we're also preparing for implementation of the Police Ethics, Conduct and Scrutiny Scotland Act 2025, which will expand our remit even further. As we deal with these challenges, I've been grateful for the commitment shown by my staff and for the constructive working relationships we've had with our partners. We have sought additional funding from the Government to help manage the increased demand, and we're pleased to have been allocated an additional £1 million in our budget for the next financial year, albeit that we do not think that is all we're going to require. While these are challenges facing us at PIRC, some are also challenges for the broader criminal justice system and may be indicative of issues across public services more generally. At PIRC, though, we also see opportunities ahead. We've commissioned a strategic review to provide a comprehensive assessment of our strategic direction, our performance and our governance, as well as this changing environment in which we're operating. The review aims to ensure that PIRC remains fit for purpose, and we expect to publish the findings of that shortly. We welcome this opportunity to meet with the committee and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a very helpful opening statement. So I wonder if I can just pick up on the reference that you made to Police Scotland, and obviously they're experiencing a significant backlog of complaints. I wonder if you can maybe just provide a wee bit more detail on, I suppose, the nature of those complaints. And I would imagine that there'll be everything from police officers being a bit rude to much higher threshold, potentially offending. So I just wonder if you could just give us a picture of what types of complaints that we're looking at there.
You're right, Convener, in that it covers a range of types of complaints. What it doesn't include is criminal complaints, so those are being processed timeously. The backlog is in non-criminal complaints about the police, and it is a significant backlog, unfortunately. Within that, Police Scotland has recently started categorising its complaints in a similar way to the PIRC categorises the cases that we deal with. So there's category A, B and C complaints, and then also category A+. And they're generally categorised on the basis of complexity and sensitivity, etc. So of concern is that there are category A+ complaints in that backlog, and there's also around 342 category A complaints. So these are ones that we would be most concerned about in terms of the nature of them. Police Scotland has been taking steps to address that backlog. So very recently it has allocated just under 1,300 complaints to non-PSD divisions within Police Scotland, so local policing divisions and other national divisions, with the target of completing those complaints by April, I believe. Now that is, if that is successful, that would be very positive in terms of those complainers who've already been waiting some time for a response to their complaint, now having the chance to have that complaint response sooner rather than later. In terms of what that means for PIRC, what we are concerned about is that the dealing with 1,300 complaints in such a short period of time will mean that suddenly there are 1,300 complainers who are then eligible to apply to Park for a complaint handling review, and actually in a very compressed period of time as well. So it's almost like a surge of complaint handling review applications we would experience. So that's something that we're facing in the next few months and having to prepare for.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, that's really a helpful sort of overview. And I wonder if I can just sort of stay on that I suppose I'd make reference to a piece of work that the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland has done recently, and that has, I suppose, produced findings that abuse of position for sexual purposes now accounts for around 30% of its most serious cases that it deals with clear patterns of male officers exploiting vulnerable women. Not sure if you're aware of the report. I'm just interested in whether PERC collects data and publishes equivalent data for Scotland, and what proportion of the more serious investigations that you deal with or have been dealing with in recent years have involved predatory or sort of sexually exploitive behaviour by officers. And you'll understand, obviously, violence against women and girls is a theme that commonly comes up in committee. So I'm quite keen to explore that as an issue.
Thank you, Convener. I'll maybe say something generally and then invite Phil to come in on that. So PERC typically does not deal with those kinds of allegations against the police. Allegations of a sexual nature will often be investigated by some independent officers within Police Scotland, and there is a reason for that in the sense that Police Scotland has sexual offence liaison officers at its disposal in a manner that PERC does not, and so those people will be trained to deliver an appropriate service to victims of those types of crime. My predecessor had made a proposal to the Lord Advocate that those types of criminal allegations should come to PERC. As far as I know, no decision has been taken on that. It would incur significant costs because PERC would need to train specialist staff to deal with those types of allegations so that we could provide the best possible service to the complainers in those cases. And Phil can maybe talk a little bit more about that. In terms of, we do publish data about the types of cases that we deal with in the sense that, and I can share with you, currently we have 196 live investigations. The vast majority of those relate to allegations of assault against police officers or members of police staff. And then we currently have around 40 investigations into deaths in custody and deaths following police contact. So generally speaking, they make up the bulk of the allegations we're investigating. But other cases will involve discharge of firearms, for example, or presentation of firearms, other criminal allegations, and various other matters. Phil, do you want to come in and say any more about that?
Yeah. In terms of the question around data, we don't collect data that is relevant to abuse of power for sexual purposes. We have had dialogue with PONI, with IOPC. Because of our statutory remit, then it's a matter for the Crown, obviously, to direct the Commissioner to conduct an investigation. We've only had one criminal investigation in recent years where there was a referral from the Crown, which was then subsequently concluded. To take the point the Commissioner's made in relation to the proposal, it's widely accepted, I think, across Ombudsman services for police and oversight that there are significant issues to be tackled. I know that in England and Wales there is a significant effort ongoing, and they've seen a significant increase in the number of referrals and complaints in this area. The former Commissioner did make a submission in relation to what the potential for the PERC having a capability, but recognising the significant risks that would run alongside that in terms of managing witnesses' expectations, forensic science, interdependencies, which currently do not exist. So the aspiration was there, and the kind of questions being asked. The capability in and of itself would see a significant, or require a significant uplift to the park. The wider issue in terms of how prevalent it is, we can't answer that. That would be a matter for the Chief Constable.
Yeah, and I appreciate that kind of resource constraint that you have and the challenges around that. And, you know, it's interesting to hear your comments there about what's going on sort of south of the border as well. So perhaps indicative of a much greater acknowledgement of the challenges faced around abuse of power, sexual predators, and so on. And next week we've got the HMI for prosecutions coming in, so we may well follow up just on the sort of role of COPFIS and particularly Cap D in dealing with police officers in the context of criminal allegations. So thank you for that. So I'm just going to hand over to Liam Kerr, and then I'll bring in... Just on that point,
a very brief thank you.
Yeah,
it's just I wonder if you could clarify. You said sexual cases are currently handled by independent officers within Police Scotland. Do you mean serving police officers? At the moment, that's how it's done. And can you tell us what rank they are and if they're specially trained?
Mm-hmm. So it would depend on the nature of the allegation. So essentially, if a referral came in, then it would be assessed by the Head of Public Protection, who have got a bank of officers that they can deploy to that, who are trained and deal with a variety of sexual offences on a day-to-day basis. They're highly trained. They have access to solo officers who can then support victims. It's a matter for Police Scotland who they actually appoint. Invariably, and in my experience, it would be a detective inspector or above who would lead such an investigation. Mm-hmm. I know they've got safeguards in place whereby they will allocate officers to investigate matters that are in another geographical area of Scotland. So essentially a requirement to declare any conflicts of interest at the outset. But in terms of specifics, I couldn't go into that. We're not cited on what their deployment model looks like. However, from experience, I know that they do have arrangements in place to ensure that there is an independence applied to it.
That'd be interesting I would be interested to know more about that because
yeah.
You know, it's like the police marking their own homework. But anyway, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. Laura, on the investigations that you undertake, what are the current average investigation times? And are you consistently meeting the statutory timescales?
Thanks for that question. So there are no statutory timescales for our investigations. What we have instead are key performance indicators that we've devised ourselves. And they vary according to the type of case it is. So category A cases, which are our most sensitive and complex cases, we aim to complete those within 90 days. And category B and category C cases, we aim to complete those within 120 days. Our performance over in recent years against those indicators has been very positive. So in 24-25, for example, 100% of our category A cases were completed on time and 98% of our category B and C cases. Because of the increased demands we're seeing, these are the KPIs that we're now starting to prove more challenging for us to meet. So, like I said, we're still focusing on and prioritising death investigations, and for this year to date, our performance against our KPI is 92%. So that's 92% of investigations completed within 90 days. But where we're starting to see the effects of our increased demand is in our category B and C cases. So currently our performance is 77%, so that's quite a big drop from the previous year. We're not happy with that level of service. We would very much prefer to be where we were last year and the year before. But this is purely a product of the increased demand and the fact that we are having to focus our resources on where we think it's needed most.
So that obviously begs a question. Specifically, you say it's increased demand, but can you drill into that a bit?
Sure.
What do you mean by the increased demand? And obviously, do you expect that those less meeting the KPIs to continue to degrade? And if so, what plans do you have to address it?
So as I said in my introductory remarks, there's really two key drivers for that increased demand. There's the Lord Advocate's references, and the biggest impact we're seeing there is in the vast majority of our cases involving allegations of assault. So previously, Police Scotland would refer allegations of assault to us, or the crime would refer allegations of assault to us for investigation. We would make an initial assessment and then decide which of those merited further investigation. So it used to be that the conversion rate for that was kind of in the 20%. Because of the change in the law, we're now looking at 70% of those referrals proceeding to a full investigation. So that's where that demand is arising from. And then in terms of death investigations, we're not entirely sure what's driving the rise in death investigations, but the fact is that we are carrying 40 death investigations currently, which I think is the highest number PERC has ever experienced. And like I said, is a 95% increase on the 2 previous years. In terms of how we're trying to manage that, we submitted a business case to the Scottish Government for additional funding last year. We weren't able to secure any funding last year, but we have been awarded an additional £1 million for next year. As I said, we're concerned that that is not going to be enough to tackle the increase in demand and to maintain the levels of timeliness that we would expect and that others should expect from us as well. So currently what we're doing is we're looking at how we can get maximum value out of that additional budget. And even if that, and it will help us maintain a better level of timeliness, but it may not be enough. And one of the challenges is that that demand is entirely out with our control. Particularly in areas like death investigations where the Crown directs us to do that investigation. There's no discretionary element. Where we can control things is that, as Commissioner, I have discretion in some cases whether to investigate or not. So, for example, referrals that come to us from Police Scotland or the Scottish Police Authority, we can decide after an assessment whether we want to proceed with that case to a full investigation. Obviously, the more that the Crown directs us to do, the less scope we have to exercise discretion on other cases. So, and about 95% of our work is Crown directed. So that gives you an idea of the limited scope we have for taking forward other investigations. So what we anticipate happening is we may have to exercise discretion more often. And that would be unfortunate because there are cases that we've taken forward on a discretionary basis where we think there is significant learning for Police Scotland or for which other policing agency is responsible. And it would be unfortunate if there were missed opportunities to investigate those cases and to miss out on that learning, because ultimately that is what PERC is here to do. We're here to support improvement and make sure that the policing service delivered to the public is the best that it possibly can be.
Understand, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jamie Hepburn and then Sharon Downey.
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon. Just a few questions. You've referred multiple times now to the process of categorising the cases that you have, A+ being the most serious, as you described, to C as, well, I don't think you described them as less serious, but I suppose that's the implication. But and in this, I appreciate you're not going to be able to give a comprehensive answer, but can you give us a sense of what that actually means in practical terms? What constitutes an A+ case by comparison to a C category case?
So to give you a better idea of what's in each category, a Category C case would often be an allegation of assault against a police officer. So serious from the point of view of the complainer, of course, but less serious than a death investigation, for example. So our death investigations would be Category A investigations. A Category A+ would be something quite out of the ordinary. So I think Phil can correct me if I'm wrong, but the shooting at the Park End in Glasgow, which had took place over a protracted period of time and had a significant number of witnesses, and obviously was extremely serious, and there was big issues around, you know, public confidence, etc., and the use of firearms against an individual, that would be a category A+. So the category A pluses are fairly infrequent, but that would be an incident of that nature might merit a category A+ investigation.
Is that a methodology you've devised yourself, or is it prescribed?
Yes, it's something that we've devised ourselves.
Okay. Okay. Is it possible that we could get sight of
course.
Of that? Okay.
We can give you information about the criteria we apply.
That would be useful. Just on the complaints you have more widely, and again, you might not be able to give this information now, so maybe something you have to follow up on. But what proportion of complaints you receive are upheld, and what proportion are found to be vexatious? And can that be broken down by the categories you've devised?
Maybe pass that to you, Phil.
Yeah, of course. In terms of the non-criminal complaints, we report annually on whether the policing body has applied a proper investigation into the original complaint, and whether or no they have handled that complaint to a reasonable standard. And again, last year it was in the range of 70% or thereby. So that's in relation to non-criminal complaints. In relation to criminal matters that are directed to us by the Crown, we report all the facts and circumstances to the Crown. It's for them to determine whether or no there's a vexatious complaint, or whether or no there's a sufficiency of evidence. Again, we used to determine in our recommendations that we put to the Crown whether or no we felt there was a sufficiency of evidence for a prima facie case to prosecute or not. We have stopped doing that to allow the Crown Office now to apply the Lord Advocate's reference. So we don't take any information. What I can tell you is we haven't charged anyone with making a false allegation or a false complaint about the police. We report all the circumstances to the Crown, and if they determined that there was an insufficiency or it was frankly a false complaint, then they would revert to us and instruct that an individual be cautioned and charged accordingly. Okay.
I mean, presumably, though, some that might be found to be vexatious, they might not even reach that threshold of saying, well, this constitutes a matter that the person who's made the report requires that level of sanction. There must just be something you can look at pretty quickly and say, this is not one that you really need to.
Yeah, I think it's quite complex when you're dealing particularly with, you know, by virtue of policing powers, the police can use force. It's what is reasonable in that interaction, which is where we then have to come in and define in the public interest what evidence is available, because we commonly will receive complaints where individuals have been restrained, have been handcuffed, could have been put in leg restraints and so on and so forth, which is captured on CCTV within custody suites and various other facilities. But the fact of the matter is that that might be the lawful use of force. And that doesn't mean to say the individual is vexatious. It's just that they believe that that use of force was excessive in the circumstances.
I think, I mean, they're obviously ones that would require quite a degree of investigation. I'm thinking more the ones that were referred to earlier, you know, that officer was rude to me when I went into the station to make a complaint. That type of thing, you know, how's that looked into, and can you determine that, you know, that's... there was a case to answer there for case with a lower case C rather than upper case C.
So those would be determined to be non-criminal complaints if it's about incivility of an officer or just our general demeanour and conduct at a location. If we receive a complaint from someone and we look at how the police have gone about their investigation, we don't re-investigate the complaint. No. We investigate the manner in which the police have dealt with that complaint. And if we deem it's a reasonable standard, then we will put that back. If it's clear that the police have dealt with it as a false complaint and they have given a final letter back to the complainer to that effect, and then they make application to the Commissioner for a review, if we determine that essentially the police have conducted a thorough investigation, have a well-reasoned and balanced letter back to the complainer, we will exercise discretion and not pursue that complaint.
And that can all be demonstrated through the statistics you have in terms of what was upheld and what was dismissed?
So what we determine is whether the police have dealt with the complaint
No, I get that, yeah.
Correctly.
And can it be looked at across the categories you've devised?
So essentially, the outcome that the police have, which is this complaint is a false complaint, they would determine that they give that back to the complainer that we're not upholding your complaint.
Yeah.
We then investigate that complaint, or we get the CHR application. We review the facts and circumstances, and if we are content that they've dealt with it, we don't record that it was a false complaint, because our remit is to investigate how they handled the complaint. So they may have determined upon that an individual has made a false complaint and they've put back, therefore we do not uphold your complaint. When we look at it, is it from a CHR point of view, and we determine that they've done everything, if the incident's captured on body-worn video, for instance, a great source of evidence, then it can be put beyond doubt that it was a false complaint.
But you don't record that?
Not as a false complaint.
Right, okay. That's interesting that you don't, because I wonder if that doesn't give quite a full picture then of the pressure that's being brought to you. I mean, the reason I ask this is I'm just noticing here that, you know, just this year, the first 6 months of this year, you've had a 49% increase in applications for complaint handling reviews, which is significant. Yep. I suppose what I'm trying to strive at is to get a sense of, well, what is driving this? You know, is something going badly wrong in policing, which, you know, we'd want to know about, or is there a lower threshold amongst people that might be bringing forward a request for a review? And I guess we would only know that if you actually if that information was recorded, we can understand it better.
I think Police Scotland is reporting actually that it's receiving a reduction in the number of complaints. The year, so not this year, but last year, we received a reduction in I think it was a 12% reduction in the number of complaint handling review applications. But we actually linked that with the backlog, as in Police Scotland weren't dealing with enough complaints that would then create an eligible pool of complainers large enough to maintain our levels of complaints. Now, as they're taking steps to address their backlog and they're resolving more complaints, that's then creating that pool of eligible complainers who have that final response from Police Scotland and then can apply to us if they remain dissatisfied with it. And so we think that's what's driving our 49% increase this year with the time frame that you mentioned.
Or new complaints being made, it's just they've had to work through them. Okay,
I think that, and I suppose that then ties in with what I was saying initially, that as Police Scotland works through its backlog and these 1,300 complaints that is allocated to other divisions outside of professional standards, that then creates a pool of 1,300 eligible complainers who then are entitled to apply to PERC for a complaint handling review. So we are anticipating that our increase that we're receiving will continue as those complaints are dealt with.
But it'll level off once that backlog is...
Ideally, once the backlog has been dealt with and we've worked our way through any applications arising out of that backlog, then what we would hope would happen, that would level off. That might take some time. For example, I mentioned that we're anticipating potentially around 350 additional complaints. That's more than we would usually deal with in a year. So for us to be able to work through that backlog would take some time.
So what was that number you said?
We're anticipating around 350 additional applications, which is more than we would deal with in a year usually.
Right, okay. That's helpful, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sharon Dowie, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you. Good morning. Afternoon, sorry. I was going to ask you about the backlog in police complaints, but I think you've actually covered everything there with Jamie Hepburn. So you've said that PERC has experienced a surge in investigative work, which it states is beyond our capacity. And you've said you've currently got 196 investigations, with 40 of these being death investigations. And it says the timeline for service is at risk, and estimates the number of investigations which meet the timeline target will fall to 40%, which is below an acceptable standard. So what needs to be done to help PERC work through this level of investigative work to meet the timeline for completion?
So obviously additional resources would be beneficial, and that's where our focus is at the moment. We have a number of recruitment campaigns on the go, and we're looking for additional investigators that will assist. Another thing that would assist would be a reduction in demand, but we, in terms of death investigations, there's no sign of that happening at the moment. On a positive note, we are seeing a reduction in the a kind of recent reduction in the allegations of assault that are being referred to us. What we're trying to understand at the moment is whether that's a genuine reduction in allegation of assaults or whether it's something to do with recording or referral practices. But if that was to continue, that reduction in demand would be incredibly helpful in allowing us to then focus on the cases that we do have and on our death investigations. PERC has also done a lot of work in recent years around trying to work more efficiently. So trying to extract more from the resources that we do have, and I'm not sure that there's much more we can do in terms of efficient working, within ourselves without additional resources. But one area that we are looking at is that PERC is a national organisation and we deal with incidents across Scotland, but we're based in Hamilton. Our staff, our investigators, will spend time travelling to the north, for example. To take witness statements, to deal with the aftermath of an incident, and obviously that travelling time to and from the north or even to the south, to Stranraer, for example, it is not the best use of their time. So one of the things that we're looking at with this additional funding that we have for next year is potentially opening an office in the north, so a kind of northern hub, and placing an investigation team in the north, so that we can then deploy to incidents more quickly, and for those investigators to then be allocated incidents in the north that they can then investigate and hopefully do so more efficiently and more productively. That is still very much at the scoping stage. Obviously, new offices cost money, so spending money to save money is a bit of an issue. And what we're really looking for is opportunities for co-location with other public sector bodies in the north. So that's something that we're currently exploring. And if we can secure some premises, we'd be keen to then recruit a team for the north, and it would have other benefits as well in terms of not being perceived to be a central belt based organisation, which I think would be positive in terms of local communities. It also would open up a kind of pool of people for recruitment as investigators who maybe previously would never have considered a position with PERC because they wouldn't be willing to travel to Hamilton, for example. So there are a number of other benefits, but the real driver is about efficiency of working and trying to get the most value for money from our investigation team.
So Police Scotland at the moment are obviously rolling out body-worn video. You said earlier about recent reduction in allegations of assault. Could that be with body-worn video? Is it too early to tell about that just now?
It's entirely possible that body-worn video is playing a role, and I would hope that it is. The reduction in referrals around allegations of assault that we've received, and also the kind of general reduction in the number of complaints that Police Scotland is receiving, we'd asked them to do a little bit of work to try and understand, is it connected to body-worn video? But actually they've done some divisional analysis, and some of the reductions are being seen in divisions such as Glasgow and Lanarkshire, which do not yet have body-worn video. So it seems that the reduction is happening regardless of body-worn video, albeit that the scale of reduction in other divisions, body-worn video may well have played a role. I mean, we have always been hopeful of the possibilities of body-worn video, in that once incidents are referred to us, if we are then able to review the body-worn video footage quickly, we can immediately see whether the complaint is credible or not, and that might help us make an early decision about whether some cases proceed to full investigation.
You said earlier about you had some additional funding for next year. Does the 2026-27 allocation allow PERC to meet its statutory obligation?
I think, despite the challenges that we're facing, PERC is meeting its statutory obligations. Our concern is around how quickly we're able to do that. And I think more resources would allow us to move faster and provide people with an outcome to our investigations more quickly. And that would obviously be desirable. So at the moment, we're still delivering. It's just a matter of how quickly we're delivering.
The question you'd mentioned earlier as well about the rules and corroboration from the Lord Advocate. When that happened, was any extra funding allocated to PERC so that they could, because obviously it increased the number of complaints that you had to go and look into. Was there any extra funding for that?
No, there was no allocated funding at that time for the impact of the Lord Advocate's references. And I think in some ways, the impact's not just on PERC, it's across the entire criminal justice system. It's on Police Scotland, it will be on the Crown Office, it will be on the court service ultimately as cases progress through. I think because PERC immediately started applying the court's ruling, we were very quickly able to see its impact on our caseload and that initial 239% increase in that first quarter that we applied it. I think maybe the rest of the justice system is still grappling with the impact of the Lord Advocate's references, and I'm not entirely clear that they're embedding it in everyday work. I think they are in some types of cases, particularly the cases that prompted the references in the first place, so thinking about kind of more serious sexual offences. But the fact is the ruling applies to all cases, so I think its impact on the justice system more generally is still to be determined, and that's perhaps something that a future Justice Committee may be interested in.
Okay. William McNeill.
Good afternoon. I think you're quite correct in the last statement you made there, because it has far-reaching implications, the changes corroboration. You've covered a lot of ground, so I won't go over it. Did you say earlier that the changes to corroboration, which has resulted in your uplift in workload, were mainly to do with allegations of assault? Is that mainly where? And the nature of those cases, is that where someone has alleged that they were assaulted by a police officer?
That's right. And I would say it applies to all our cases where there's a criminal allegation against the police. It's just that the allegations of assault are the vast majority of the cases that we investigate. So therefore, that's where we're really seeing that increase as a result of the Lord Advocate's references.
So Jamie Hepburn asked you this earlier about so that the fine line between law enforcement, isn't there, for the powers of police officers and an allegation of assault? Is that the sort of cases we're talking about here, or is it in the main, or is it so varied?
So one of the reasons that we have so many allegations of assault that PERC investigates rather than that being allocated to Police Scotland to investigate is that back in 2021, following the review by Lady Angelini, the Crown Office issued a standing instruction that all allegations of assault that engaged Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights and allegations of unlawful detention, engaging Article 5 of the Convention, should come to PERC for independent investigation. So that happened in 2021, and that's really one of the first steps that massively increased PERC's workload, because previously Police Scotland would have investigated a lot of those, but Lady Angelini's view was that because they engaged the human rights of the complainer, that they should be dealt with independently by PERC, and so those cases are all coming to us now. So that was the first stage in our workload increasing, and then with the Lord Advocate's references and the changes in the law around corroboration, that's kind of been the second step in increasing our workload.
Do you think, given the changes to corroboration now, that decision in itself should be reviewed, because it's going to be a much lower bar for an allegation of assault against a police officer that's coming to you? Do you think maybe that should be reviewed?
I completely understand where Lady Angelini was coming from in terms of allegations that engage people's human rights, and that there's a kind of public assurance and public confidence aspect in those being looked at by an independent body. But I'm also mindful of the conversation we had right at the start, that allegations of abusive position, for example, and predatory behaviour, I also think those would benefit from an independent body reviewing them. But as we mentioned before, there's a significant capacity and capability.
But that's not what I'm asking about. What I'm saying, what I'm asking you is, if effectively corroboration that the Lord Advocate's reference has lowered the bar for alleging an assault, I'm just wondering, should all these cases come to you now? Because there's got to be, if there's lots of cases where there's a fine line. I mean, you've got to think about police officers as well. If we get the balance wrong, in fact, the HMI inspector made this very point to the committee itself not so long ago, that the police are very accountable, probably more accountable than any other service. Now, obviously, where there has been a serious allegation, then that needs to be properly investigated. We need to comply with human rights. But given there are some fine lines between allegations of an assault by a police officer who may be saying, well, I was just doing my job as a police officer detaining someone, and now it has ended up at PERC. Corroboration has now changed the law, so it's a lower test. I just wondered, given all that, do you think there should be a review of all these assaults that are coming to you now that corroboration has changed or not?
I think If PERC is applying the law in Scotland and these cases are capable of being prosecuted, then I think it's appropriate that they're coming to an independent body for investigation.
Right, so there still have to be the same test as if it would be coming to you as coming to the Crown Office. Yeah. So it'd have to be some evidence based. You can't just come and begin. Because you use the word allegation, there's obviously more than that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So during the course of our investigation, we'd be looking for evidence to support the allegation made by the complainer or made by someone else on behalf of the complainer. Sometimes the allegations are made by witnesses to what happened. So given that the purpose of our investigation is to establish the evidence and then enable the prosecutor to make a decision about whether there's a sufficiency of evidence to prosecute, then I do think there's value in them coming to an independent body.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I wonder if I can maybe just finish with a question. I think there's been some really interesting points have come out today just about the sort of shifting workload that PERC is dealing with just through a range of external factors that, as you were saying, you've got no control over. So I suppose following on from this sort of discussion around resources that you have to respond to that, I wonder if you'd be able to sort of outline whether there's any either structural or legislative sort of reforms that you believe would that are necessary, perhaps, to strengthen independent oversight of policing and obviously ensure that you're able to, as PERC, carry out your role to the best of your ability.
Thank you. I think given that we're still looking at implementing the Police Ethics, Conduct and Scrutiny Act, which will make quite significant changes to the remit of PERC and expand our role quite a lot. I think that's probably quite a lot for us to be getting on with at the moment in terms of expanding our horizons and getting involved in new areas of work. So, for example, while some aspects of the Act will just impact investigations work and impact our reviews work, there's also an aspect of the Act that gives us an entirely new role in relation to whistleblowing, for example, which is something that we haven't been involved in before. So I think with that on the horizon and some of those provisions still to come in, I think that's our focus for the immediate future. I'm not aware of anything that we specifically would like to change from like a legislative point of view in terms of enhancing our role. I think there's a lot for us to get to grips with in that Act, and then maybe it's a question for a couple of years' time once that's implemented and we see how it's working, whether there's anything outstanding that we think we require or any novel things that have come up during that time.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, thank you. Well, if there are no more questions from members, can I thank you both for your attendance today? That completes our session and it completes our business for today in public. I wonder if I can just remind members that we did agree that we would defer our review of evidence and our consideration of our annual report to next week, possibly. And if, in the meantime, members have any points that they want to raise with regard to the annual report, please feel free to feed those in and we'll take those forward. So, as I say, that completes our session and we'll now close this meeting. Thank you very much.